Everybody, welcome. I declare open this public hearing of the Senate Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport Legislation Committee. The Senate has referred to the committee the particulars of proposed expenditure for 2022-23 and related documents for cross-portfolio Murray-Darling Basin Plan matters. The committee has before it a program listing agencies and divisions relating to matters for which senators have given notice. The committee has listed Friday, the 20th of May 2022 as the date for the return of answers to questions taken on notice. Senators are encouraged to provide any written questions on notice to the committee secretariat as soon as possible following the hearings. Under Standing Order 26, the committee must take all evidence in public session. This includes answers to questions on notice. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. The Senate, by resolution in 1999, endorsed the following test of relevance of questions at estimates hearings. Any questions going to the operations or financial positions of the departments and agencies which are seeking funds in the estimates are relevant questions for the purposes of estimates hearings. And I remind officers that the Senate has resolved that there are no areas in connection with the expenditure of public funds where any person has a discretion to withhold details or explanations from the Parliament or its committees unless the Parliament has expressly provided otherwise. The Senate has resolved also that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy, and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. I particularly draw the attention of witnesses to an order of the Senate from the 13th of May 2009, specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. Witnesses are specifically reminded that a statement that information or a document is confidential or consists of advice to government is not a statement that meets the requirements of the 2009 order. Instead, witnesses are required to provide some specific indication of the harm to the public interest that could result from the disclosure of the information or the document. An officer called to answer a question for the first time should state their full name and the capacity in which they appear, and witnesses should speak clearly and into the microphones to assist Hansard to record proceedings. Could I please remind everyone present to switch off their mobile phones or render them inaudible. Senators, departments and agencies have been provided with advice on the arrangements in place to ensure the Budget Estimates 2022-23 hearings are conducted in a safe environment. This guidance is also available from the Secretariat. Thank you. The committee appreciates the cooperation of all attendees in adhering to these arrangements. I now welcome Senator the Honourable Anne Ruston, Minister for Families and Social Services and Minister for Women's Safety, and the Honourable Troy Grant, Inspector General of Water Compliance. Minister Ruston, do you or Mr Grant wish to make an opening statement?
I don't, but Mr Grant may well.
I would. Thank you, Chair. I would appreciate the opportunity. Good morning, Senators. I'd like to inform the committee and update you on several matters since our last appearance at this committee regarding my work plan, as well as my response to the Senate Committee's report on Water Legislation Amendment, Inspector General of Water Compliance and Other Measures Act of 2021. Since I last addressed the committee, the office has continued to work towards meeting our work plan commitments that are published on our website. I'd like to advise the committee of a minor amendment to the work plan, which will be published, as I'm required to do, on our website in the coming weeks. The first audits and outcomes of consultative assessments undertaken by my office will also be published via my website from May 2022 onwards. We have completed several significant rounds of recruitment, with all senior leadership positions now being filled, as well as several graduate rotations currently underway or completed in our office. And finally, we are working with the department on options for positions which may be suitable for Indigenous apprenticeship program, given we have multiple regional locations available. Our office continues to establish its operational independence and work with the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, being the department, to form supporting administrative arrangements, and I thank the Secretary, Deputy Secretary Tung and the First Assistant Secretary Timson from Compliance Enforcement Division for their ongoing support. Our office, since the last committee meeting, has finalised a Memorandum of Understanding with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, and we are in the final stages of completing our multilateral MOU with each of the basin jurisdictions. The MOUs will embed key principles in the way our agencies work together and build on our common values of integrity, accountability, respect, trust and transparency. Finally, I've considered the recommendations of the committee's report, as I referred to earlier. A number of the recommendations relate to areas of responsibility of the Australian Government or the Department, and a number of them being recommendations 1, 2 and 3 relate specifically to the Inspector General of Water Compliance. In regards to recommendation 1, the Inspector General of Water Compliance and the MDBA Authority, as I've just alluded to, have established and finalised our MOU. We intend to enter into the multilateral MOU understanding with the basin jurisdictions and complete that by mid-2022. The MOUs, as I've alluded to, are embedded by key principles. Regarding recommendation number 2, the Inspector General of Water Compliance intends to work with both the Commonwealth and state agencies via the previously mentioned MOUs. In addition to the Inspector General of Water Compliance, I chair the Regulatory Leaders Forum, which I established, bringing together state representatives to discuss matters of priority in compliance reporting. It also forms a forum to discuss various improvements to compliance and oversight activities, as well as being a key forum to provide information on future work plan priorities. Regarding recommendation 3, it's in relation to finances. Under the 2022-23 ministerial budget statement, we have been allocated $3.2 million of funding to provide the office over 2 years, funding to improve trust and increasing transparency in water management. The funding, titled Supporting the Murray-Darling Basin Building Community Confidence in Water Compliance, will enable our office to further build on the relationships we have established and are establishing via our field officer network across the 1 million square kilometres of the basin. In closing, I'd like to thank the members of my team. The office have been working extraordinarily hard over the past 8 months. We currently have 9 open investigations. Since I last spoke to you, we have closed 4 investigations. We have 4 significant audits in train underway. 2 are trade compliance related and 2 relate to water resource plan compliance. Thank you for your time. I look forward to taking your questions with Deputy Blacker and Deputy Leopold, who are both here today.
Thank you very much. Senator Grogan, are you going to lead the call this morning?
Senator Walsh.
Senator Walsh, terrific. Good morning, Senator Walsh.
Good morning, Chair. Nice to see you again. Thank you, Mr. Grant. I'd just like to follow up on some of your last comments there on the $3.2 million over 2 years for the office in relation to the water compliance field officers program. Can you provide us an update of how many field officers your office currently employs?
We have a Director of Field Operations and we have 5 field officers located positions. 1 is currently under recruitment processes, so they're located at Albury, Mildura, Loxton, Narromine, Gundawindi.
Thank you. That's 4 locations you just mentioned.
I beg your pardon?
Was that 4 locations that you just went through? 5.
5.
Albury, Mildura, Loxton, Gundawindi. I missed one there.
Narromine.
Never mind. Thank you. So you have, how many field officers do you have in each of those locations at the moment?
A single field officer, but in, in those offices there are also other members of our office that perform other functions.
Okay, thank you. How many additional field officers do you anticipate that the funding you've just received in the budget will enable you to employ?
We currently have 7 positions under recruitment to meet and assist us with the budget allocations. Some of those won't necessarily be field officer positions, but may form communication roles to assist the field officers in the communication on the ground, as well as more broadly.
And is the intention to add those staff to the 5 locations that you're already in, or is the intention to open other field offices?
I'm sorry, that audio just dropped out at the end of your question, sorry.
Is the intention to add the new staff to the existing field office locations, or to open new field offices?
No plans at this early stage for additional field officers in those locations, but that's not something I'd rule out in the future. We've started to create what I would describe as some regional hubs, which assist with the work in our office across the different functions. So we have a number of staff at different offices. For example, we have 3 in Albury, 3 in Mildura, in those regional locations, 2 at Loxton, 2 at Gundawindi, and the recruitment processes that we're undertaking will add, I believe, to those numbers.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify whether the intention is to hire additional people in the category of field officer, the budget funding that you've just received, that you will receive.
Sorry, what was that? Sorry, can I just repeat the question, please?
Am I having audio problems?
It just a little bit fades in and out, sorry, just at the end.
Okay, sorry about that. So with the 3.2 million that you've got, are you intending to employ people in the category of field officer with that funding?
In the future, potentially, but the current round of recruitments isn't for additional field officers. It's in relation to roles that support the field officers, including authorised officers for the compliance function of our office.
So, thank you. So have you had a chance to figure out, with the additional funding, how many new field officers you can recruit?
No, the funding hasn't come through as yet. It's obviously got to pass the House as a bill. So, no, we're planning on that, but haven't finalised those plans until the budget measures are complete.
And is the thinking in relation to any additional field officers that they would be located in the existing field offices?
That would, if any addition or increase in field officer presentation could be at current locations or potentially could be at new locations. But I think where we've identified and located the field officers gives us good geographical reach. It also allows us to have connectivity between the field officers where they are reachable, given the large geographical size of the basin. And it also complements the location of other members of our office where they're located. So providing a good working environment for efficiency and effectiveness in what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. And in relation to that 3.2 million provided for in the budget, are there any other additional activities which that funding will go towards?
Yeah, communications, as I alluded to earlier, we weren't provisioned in our establishment with any funding for communications. That didn't come across in the machinery of government arrangements, and that's a critical part in allowing me to do my job pursuant to the Act, which requires me under legislation to communicate with the Basin community and the Australian community. So that will play a critical role in that funding allocation as well.
And just finally, to clarify that those communications roles are different from the field officer roles. You're seeking different people with different sorts of skills, and what will they broadly be doing?
Yes, that's correct. A communications director is just finalised. The recruitment of a communications director has just been finalised, and they're currently being onboarded. And our communications director will help us establish the exact roles and relationships and the functionality between each of those jobs that complement the field officers and the functions that they play. So there will be a couple of generalists in those roles that can work across different skill sets in our office, as well as specialists with specific communication specialist skills, as well as other engagement or subject matter expertise.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Grant.
You're welcome, Senator. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Senator Antic. Just excuse me, Senator Patrick, you have questions for the Minister, but we don't have the...
Roberts.
I'm sorry, Senator Roberts. I did this to you last time too. Thank you. That'll be how I remember. Senator Roberts, I apologise. You have questions for the Minister?
I think I'm being verbal, not verbal, but there's a standing order against this, isn't there?
You're being complimented.
You have questions of the Minister. We only have the Inspector General.
Senator Patrick.
Thank you. Well, we've got a few to go, and I'll leave it to the last. Thank you. Senator Antic.
Well, these are questions about buybacks. So can I put those to you, or do the department? Yeah.
I think that might be the department.
Yeah, I might.
So do you want to wait till the department
I might hold
comes
on. I
at
think
the end
actually,
of
yeah.
this
Thanks,
section?
Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Senator Patrick, you don't have questions at this time,
for
but
the
you
IG.
reserve the right,
Yep.
as usual. Senator Grogan.
Thank you. Interested in getting an update on your progress on metering. You spoke to us at the last hearing about coverage, accuracy and timeliness being your key focus areas. And I'm just wondering if you can give us an outline of that work in terms of the accuracy and coverage since you last spoke to us.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. It's a critical part of our work, and a lot of attention and effort has gone into that work. I'll let my expert in the field be more specific to the answers, but when we were established, it's fair to say that the states were at very, very different places in regards to metering rollout and their capacity in that regard. Before I hand over to Deputy Blacker, I'd like to compliment the states for the progress that they've made in the last 8 months, and I'm confident that whilst we're not there yet, we're on a much improved pathway. Still got a long way to go, but particularly in relation to a recent agreement at the Regulatory Leaders Forum about the way that we'll be reporting the updates. So we're actually measuring outcomes and apples with apples rather than the very difficult way to understand the progress that is being made or not across each of the jurisdictions. So,
can I just pick you up
yes.
on a few things before we
Sure.
go to Mr. Blacker? So that reporting, what do you anticipate that's going to look like, and how long do you think it's going to take for us to get that in place? I know you were talking earlier about starting to post various things on the website from May. What's that reporting on the monitoring going to look
yeah,
like?
it's a scorecard, effectively. So we've built the original template. We took it to the Regulatory Leaders Forum, and now we have a working group to refine and improve that scorecard. The important thing with improving these areas is shared ownership of it. So we want the states and the jurisdictions to buy in and own that product. They currently report under the Compliance Compact. Majority of that compact has been achieved. Obviously, metering is one that's still outstanding. So I'm really confident in the work that my team is doing with the jurisdictions led by Deputy Inspector Blacker. So it'll be in the form of a scorecard that'll be more easily digestible by the Australian public as well as those who are experts in the metering space. So,
Good.
I'd leave Deputy Inspector Blacker. I don't want to steal his thunder.
Absolutely.
He's a legitimate expert in this field. So,
And
thank you.
Mr. Blacker, if you could also cover off on, what proportion of water users don't have a licence, if you have that, and also what you're finding in terms of the number of meters that are not compliant with Australian standards.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So there's a few things I'll pick up on. The Inspector General's talked a little bit about the reporting piece that we're doing. I'll pick up on the metering market as well. So we've been doing some research to understand the supply side. One of the key things when you've got a particularly difficult and complex supply chain, we've got delivery, we've got installation, we've got validation of meters. There's lots of moving parts in that supply chain. So we've been looking at understanding each of those, and we've broken it down into 21 component parts of that supply chain, looked at each of those individually with all of the relevant stakeholder areas to really try and get to answer one simple question, which is the supply market capable of delivering what is required for the reform? And we're quite confident to say that the commercial market for non-urban meters can meet the supply needs for the reforms. It's particularly acute at the moment in New South Wales, where there's a lot of active reform. It's also going to become acute in Queensland as they roll out new metering policies. So a lot of work going into that. It's been an area of contention for a while, but we're quite confident that that supply market can supply, and it's been growing over the last couple of years. The number of accredited meters is increasing.
Do you have a sort of a quantum?
Yes, so there's 15 available meters now which are compliant with the Australian standard, and they're meters up to 1800 pipe diameter. They also, we can see a number of meters moving through patent approval processes which will go to larger pipe sizes. So we're confident that that market's growing and that the investment by private meter manufacturers is there to meet that demand.
Thank you. I note that your comment about the states working quite productively with you on some of these issues. Do you have a sense of what proportion of the states are further ahead? Like which states are doing better than others? Obviously, New South Wales, unsurprisingly, has probably got more challenges than others. But in terms of that accurate and more widespread water metering, are there large variations between the states?
So particularly on accuracy, so the Compliance Compact has a commitment from all jurisdictions to move to more accurate meters by 2025. Different jurisdictions are on different pathways moving towards that time frame. You can see a lot of that reform on the ground at the moment within New South Wales, so those numbers are updating quite frequently. The New South Wales Natural Resource Access Regulator publishes the most up-to-date numbers on those. The numbers I've got in front of me, just very quickly to give you an idea, in July 2021 for Tranche 1, so these are metres in northern New South Wales over 500 mils, they were at 23% compliance. By September that year they'd moved to 54% compliant, and by December that year they'd moved to 69%. So within a very short number of months you can see a fairly steep increase in compliance. New South Wales are into Tranche 2 metres at the moment, so that's in particular again northern inland, but those less than 500 mils. So I think they're running education and compliance campaigns at the moment within New South Wales about those reforms. And again, New South Wales, NRA is the best place to get the most up-to-date numbers for those.
Just on that, do other states publish this sort of information as well? And I know New South Wales's information is AS 4747 compliant. Are other states AS 4747 compliant, or are they compliant with their own standard?
It's a range, and part of what we're trying to do in the metering scorecard is to get to a really simple comparison across all the jurisdictions, so that's nice and clear. And we've got all of the states engaged with working with us on that scorecard at this point in time. It varies. So Victoria published their numbers. South Australia also published some numbers. Queensland at the moment just finalising their metering policy, so they're not yet into the implementation phase, but as I said before, they've got till 2025, but we're monitoring closely to ensure that they've got a pathway to that compliance and that improved accuracy by 2025.
Could I just add there that they've provided us with that draft, and I'm confident in what I've read in the direction that they're heading from Queensland.
So it ranges. Different jurisdictions are at different points, but New South Wales are probably giving the most up-to-date live tracking of that information, and they're doing it tranche by tranche. So they've got 3 tranches. They're in the middle of tranche 2, and those numbers are going up pretty frequently. So, every 3 months or so, they're updating those numbers.
Great. Have you taken any compliance action or investigations relating to meters to date?
So not specifically in relation to meters. So we've got 9 current investigations. They all relate to water trade rules. So we are the enforcement authority for the Basin Plan water trading rules. So all 9 of those relate to that. We've closed 4, so none of those 13 have related to metering offences. We do have 2 which we referred to South Australia. I'd have to check, at least one of those was not metering. One of them may have had components related to metering, but as the Commonwealth regulator, what we do when we receive information of potential non-compliance relating to metering is we refer that to state regulators. They then get the first opportunity to pursue that. They've got the metering offences, we have the water theft offence. So we then work with state jurisdictions to ensure that they get an outcome on those metering investigations.
Do you find that division of responsibility or ability to act is challenging, or does it work well enough?
At the moment, my summation would be it works well enough. It is challenging at times as people, it's more about the education of people getting to know who we are and what we do and how we fit. So that's an ongoing conversation right across the board, not just in relation to water theft or metering, but all of the aspects of what we do. But we have, as Inspector General mentioned before, a regulatory leaders forum where we have the senior executives in each jurisdiction responsible for compliance. We meet quarterly and we work pretty collaboratively through those issues. So it's not perfect at this point in time, but we are building that kind of education and maturity and understanding of what we do as a business, and at this point, no significant issues from our perspective.
Thank you. Mr Grant, you mentioned you're recruiting a comms person. Is part of their role going to be about building an awareness and an education piece about your role?
Absolutely.
And do you think that's one of the critical pieces in terms of success of your organisation?
Without question. It's probably nearly the most important thing. The challenge we have there is the myths that are out there need to be bust to get some independent truth and transparency on issues. So we've got to stop people marking their own homework and putting up information that's just not incorrect, that just erodes trust. We've got to stop people out there with an agenda pushing that erodes trust. And what really startled me as the Interim Inspector General, I was provided with some research conducted by the MDBA through, it was Orima, I think was the company that did the research, which indicated that licence holders in the basin, and don't quote me on the exact figure, but it's pretty close, licence holders in the basin, water licence holders, only 27%, I think it was, knew they were actually in the Murray-Darling Basin. So there's some really poor foundational knowledge issues out there that we feel, whilst we don't have a statutory specific education role to play, it's absolutely incumbent on us to provide the educational piece in all our communication.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's a pretty shocking number, isn't it?
I was shocked.
Unreal.
Yeah. I'll provide the actual figure on notice to the Senate, but yeah.
It would be interesting. Would it be interesting to understand, was there a geographic, is that data more surprising in a particular part of the system?
It's not my data or my research. The authority owns that, so they gave me the courtesy of providing that to me during the interim stage. But we've engaged Orima, who have already got skin in the game and understand the issues. We've commissioned them to help build our survey work, where we'll build on that information and that lack of knowledge in our annual survey, so we can measure and independently be examined as to how we're tracking in getting that education out there, the confidence in us, if the trust and confidence across the basin is improving because of our efforts, or if it's not, so we can move.
It gives you a great
So
baseline, doesn't it, to measure
it gives
your
us
success.
the baseline.
Yeah.
So we're in the final stages of constructing that. I've got some meetings with myself, the executive and the leadership to finalise that survey in the coming weeks. So that'll be a really critical part of our comms piece, and we'll provide that to the Senate so you can track how we're going as well.
Oh, that's terrific.
And that'll be published.
Yeah.
Everything we do is transparent and will be published.
Very good. I believe that brings us to the end of questions.
I might have a couple of supplementaries.
Of course you do, Senator Patrick.
So just in relation to the office at Loxton, how many people are involved in the FTE? Two.
One field officer and one person that works in our compliance.
And that's designed to
A monitoring team, sorry. Our monitoring.
That's designed to get easy. So you've got basically, you're spread out across the basin, and so that people can get access to you pretty easily.
Yes, and they can access people, and we have 3 in Adelaide as well, so there's 5 in South Australia currently, and happy to recruit more if more people respond to our advertisement role. Doesn't matter where they come from the basin, we can accommodate them.
In your role as the Inspector General, and now that you've been empowered by the Parliament, have you had any complaints or representations to you in relation to indiscretions or theft or inappropriate use of water? Any complaints have been made to you yet?
Yeah, Deputy referred to 2 that we referred back to the South Australian regulator. And there was another one where our field officer was given information about a drug crop in the area, which not part of our remit, but we pass it on to South Australian Police, for example. So it's a really good ears and eyes field intelligence capability.
Is that right across the basin, or just South Australia?
No, they're the 3, the 2 formal ones that we've referred, and the third one from South Australia at the moment. But no, not. I'd have to check with our Director of Field Operations.
And in relation to those, how do you actually then prosecute, not in a litigious sense, but prosecute an investigation? What's the response to those sorts of allegations that are made?
They're investigated by the primary regulator, being the South Australian agency in this case, and when we monitor and oversight the outcome result of that.
So you refer it to the relevant authority,
yes,
the relevant jurisdiction,
yes,
and I seem to recall under the Act they carry out their work, and only in circumstances where you're not happy you intervene.
The step-in provisions, that's correct.
Yep, okay.
And we've had no cause for that.
That's particularly in relation to the water theft offence. So there are particular provisions in the Act in relation to that water theft offence that require us to provide that to the state regulator in the first instance. But what we're also seeing is that we've got pretty active state compliance agencies. South Australia, for example, 33,000 education letters in the last, from 1 July 2020 to 30 June 2021, 263 direction letters, 210 administrative sanctions, 159 compliance breach reports, 2 criminal investigations. So we've got active regulators, and those stats are reflected in each of the jurisdictions. So what we're doing is trying to get to a reporting regime where we can do those with common definitions and common reporting language and common numbers, so that they're comparable jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And that's another piece of work we're doing with states at the moment. Take us a little bit of time because you've got to go back and reset their frameworks and collect that data. But what we're seeing is pretty active state regulators, which means a lot of what's coming to us are things where we're the direct enforcement agency, and that's particularly basin plan water trading rules.
Okay, and so you have MOUs in place with the state governments in relation to exchange of reports in relation to breaches or allegations?
That's the MOU that the Inspector General mentioned in opening address is currently under development. We've been working with state regulators for some months on that now. I think we're up to third version, draft version of that. We're hopeful that it won't be too far away before we finalise the detail on that.
Will that require a legislative change in the context of swapping information?
No.
No. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks very much, Senator Patrick. I believe that brings us to the end of questions for you, Mr Grant.
Thank you,
please
Chair.
go with the committee's thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Good luck with the rest of the day.
Just give everyone a second to swap seats. Do we have Mr Reynolds here this morning? Yep. Oh, he's just making his way here. We'll just suspend for a moment, please. Thank you. Keep us tidy. Yeah. I now welcome Mr Andrew Metcalfe AO, Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, Mr Andrew Reynolds, Acting Chief Executive Officer of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, and officers of the department. Mr Metcalfe or Mr Reynolds, do you wish to make an opening statement?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. All right, Senator Walsh or Senator Grogan, thank you.
I would like to talk about the Water for Environment Special Account report. Was the second report tabled in the last sitting week?
Senator Lynn O'Connell, Deputy Secretary. No, the report was not tabled in the last sitting week.
Minister, at the last estimates you told us that the one thing, I'll quote, the one thing I can commit to is that the Minister will comply with the requirements, referring to the requirements of the Act. On the evidence of Ms O'Connell, it sounds like the government has not delivered on that commitment.
The tabling of the report. I might seek some advice, but Yeah. my understanding is the tabling of the report is due by the
Before the
15th of
budget.
No, Senator, I can...
I have the Water Act here in front of me.
Yep.
And it says quite clearly in section 86AJ 8B that the second review should be tabled by the time the Treasurer presents the budget to the Parliament for the 22-23 financial year.
Senator, that's referring to the government's response to the review. The actual section just above that deals with the tabling of the actual WESA report review itself, and it says that the government is obliged to table the review 15 sitting days after the Minister receives the report. So the Minister received the report 20th of December.
Which was somewhat late, yeah.
15 sitting days would take that to the 9th of May that he's actually required to table the WESA report itself. The section you're referring to is the government's response.
So has the response been tabled?
No, Senator.
So that's, would we say that's a breach of the Water Act?
Now, once again, as the representing minister, and I'll let the officials correct me if I'm wrong, the normal process is that the requirement for the report to be tabled would sit with the budget, and the response would be tabled by the budget at the budget, which is normally in May, and they would have normally coincided. But because the budget was brought forward, they didn't coincide, and I'm not sure whether that was an oversight in the legislation. I'm not sure, but I think it was something to do with the timing of the changing of the budget timing.
Well, I mean, the original report was 2 months late anyway. 3 months late, because it was due on the 30th of September to the Minister. Wasn't given to the Minister until December.
Yep.
Has been discussed at length in these estimates hearings, and we've been assured that it would be tabled by the budget, even though at the time, Minister, you would have known that the budget was going to be in March.
Yeah, look, I think a lot of these things, when they're embedded in legislation, they are embedded in legislation on the basis of a normal period. And because of the election and the timing, it's changed. That's my understanding.
But the Act hasn't changed.
No, because
The Act says quite clearly
Yeah.
that it be tabled by the 2022-23 budget.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then that was on the basis that the assumption was that the 22-23 budget would be like every other budget that you normally see, and that would have been a May budget, is my understanding.
So, Senator, just in terms of the clauses you read out in that section, it's paragraph 7 that talks about the tabling of the actual report, and
Yes.
paragraph 8 that you read out, it relates to the government's response. And, I mean, it's
But I
pretty
think the
clear
point's
that...
moot, given that neither of them are available.
And they don't have to be tied together. You don't have to wait until the response is tabled to table the report. You can meet the requirements of the Act and then table the response at a later date.
I think the
Because
legislation, when it was written, contemplated budgets being held together in May, and you can see the timing of the production of the report and the release, you know, to coincide around budget time. What the
Before, just to be
legislation...
really clear,
Oh,
and I
as or
don't
before.
think that legislation is a kind of, well, we'll maybe comply with it, maybe we won't, sometimes things will change. Because things do change, but the law remains the law. And this, to me, looks like constituting a breach of the Water Act.
Senator, I'm more than happy to speak to the Minister and get some more information for you, because I'm running a little bit blind, but I'm more than happy to take that and get you a response to your...
Because it looks like this is a situation of running down the clock and trying to avoid scrutiny. Yes, the report originally to the Minister was late, but then there were 3 months. There's no good reason why the Minister, if he was acting in good faith, wouldn't just release that report and then comply with the various aspects of the Act that we're talking about here.
Well, Senator, I have no reason to believe that the Minister isn't acting in good faith, but in the absence of having had that conversation with him, I think I'd prefer to reserve, the opportunity to come back to you with an explanation before we suggest that he's not acting in good faith. I'm sure he is.
Perhaps he could table it today as part of these proceedings.
Well, as I said, I'm certainly happy to try and, in the break, get in touch and speak to the Minister's office, but that's my explanation, is my understanding of the situation.
Well, can we ask the Minister if he will table it at these proceedings, and maybe we could get an answer to that before we finish today?
Well, as I said, I'm not the Minister. I'm happy to take that on notice and to do my very best for you, Senator.
If you could do that before we finish today, we can get an answer, that would be very helpful. Did you, after the last hearings, when you made that commitment to the government abiding by the delivery of the report by the budget, did you have a conversation with the Minister about that and advise him of the commitment?
Well, first of all, we need to be clear that the tabling of the report does not coincide with the budget. That's the response. And of course, as you can see sitting around me, there are a number of officials, including, I'm sure, on the cameras, the Minister's staff there would have been well aware of the proceedings. But as I said, I'm not the Minister, I'm only the representing Minister, and I have committed to you that I will take on notice of the request that you and Senator Patrick have put to this committee, and I'll endeavour to do my best to respond to your questions today.
But my question is, did you speak to Minister Pitt about the commitment you made to this estimates hearing in February?
Oh, I speak to Minister Pitt a lot about...
And
many
did you
things.
did you mention to him that you'd made that commitment?
Look, I honestly can't remember, Senator, but, as I say, Minister Pitt would have been well aware of my comments in this hearing.
So that would imply it's an intentional decision not to do so.
No, look, I think you're jumping to conclusions there. I have in good faith offered to do my best to respond to the concerns that you've put on the table this morning. And so I would respect the fact that I'd be allowed to do that and not, continue to make suggestions when we don't have enough information to be able to make the kinds of accusations that you're making.
Well, the information I have in front of me is that the Water Act has not been complied with.
And I said I was happy to seek some further clarification in relation to the issue for a further explanation, and that's exactly what I'll do.
Well, that
Senator
would be good if we could
Grogan.
have an understanding before the hearing finishes today.
So does that finish your line of questions? Thanks, Senator Grogan. All right, Senator Antic.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some questions about buybacks for the department. Can someone tell me whether or not Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria have ruled out buybacks, the governments thereof?
I'd have to take that on notice in relation to Queensland. My understanding is Victoria and New South Wales both strongly oppose continued buybacks in the Murray-Darling Basin.
I think Queensland does as well, doesn't it? Well, I mean, given that at least those have, can you give me some idea and detail as to why water buybacks have been taken off the table? Some of the criticisms of the program that have been levelled against it.
Well, Minister Pitt made it quite clear when he released the 2020 Murray-Darling Community Investment Package that buybacks would no longer be part of the program of measures in relation to implementing the Murray-Darling Basin Plan on the basis of the negative socio-economic impacts that buybacks had caused throughout the basin, and excuse me, and those impacts are detailed at some length in the report prepared by Robbie Sefton, which we refer to as the Sefton Review. So a key focus of her quite long investigation was looking at the socio-economic impacts of implementing the Basin Plan, and in
Can you give us an
particular
idea
big
of some of
buybacks.
those? What were some of those socio-economic impacts?
With removing, basically reducing the consumptive pool in key irrigation communities throughout the basin. And off the back of the Sefton Review, the Economic Development Program is a program which is designed to actually try and inject money and economic development back into those communities. So I think there are about 30 or 35 communities that we're now focused on, or that we were focused on in terms of delivering the third round of the Economic Development Program.
And you mentioned the consumptive pool there. What is the consumptive pool in South Australia? And that includes both irrigation and Adelaide water supply.
I would have to either see if Mr Reynolds is able to provide you with information about the actual South Australian consumptive pool.
Andrew Reynolds, Acting Chief Executive of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. So in South Australia, South Australia's entitlement flow includes 1,154 gigalitres of water that can be made available for consumptive use. South Australia's chosen to issue entitlements of just in excess of 800 gigalitres against that entitlement. I don't have the precise number, but it's less than the full consumptive entitlement they could.
Okay. And if there was an option to recover water in South Australia without industrial and urban water, say for example, what would those options be?
Need to refer back to the department who's been doing the work on the recovery program.
Good morning, Dr. Peter Joanne Derham, Assistant Secretary, Water Division. In relation to South Australia, projects other than industrial and urban, as you referred to, we're currently in negotiation with South Australia on a number of urban projects, which you've just touched on. And that they're obviously looking at how they can better reuse and reticulate water in those urban settings. So better watering for sports fields without drawing on the urban water supply. So some fantastic opportunities down there. But in relation to other options, we are also talking to South Australia about a couple of projects. There has been for some time now, if you're familiar with South Australia, a prospective project in the Barossa, also leading to less draw and demand upon the River Murray system itself. More, I guess, industrial in terms of its nature, but there are also some other pipeline type projects looking at lessening the impact on the River Murray for town water supplies, so some pipelines in some of those key areas. We've done an enormous amount of work already with South Australia in terms of on-farm opportunities. You may recall the on-farm program, which has just recently been closed as we've opened up the new off-farm water efficiency measure program. But we're still working with about 20-odd farmers, small properties, to close out that project. We've seen small amounts of water returned with water efficiency savings on property. And most of the other big irrigation districts have been caught up in previous efficiency savings projects. So we really have done a fair bit of work in South Australia already in terms of off-farm and on-farm related projects.
Thank you. I've got 2 more questions, Chair, if that's all right.
Thank you.
I'm just interested in, when we've talked about this hypothetical, but what would be some of the impacts of water buybacks, the scheme, if they were to be introduced? Of recovering water through the buyback scheme.
So some of the impacts, by way of example, is that if you sell out of an entitlement, it's no longer available in that system for irrigation purposes. So you've already had a direct impact in the amount of water available for productive output. And then, of course, if you're not producing with that water, you're not buying supply chain, so you're not buying inputs into your farm property anymore, you've got less production going out. So you've got that in and out supply chain restrictions. That then leads to a downturn in the economy in the local towns. You're then seeing flow-on impacts to the community, with families leaving the district and other businesses being impacted. And we've heard previously, the impact of families leaving the district with children leaving schools. So there's a significant flow-on impact. So if you do bespoke buyback, you're having that random impact on communities. As opposed to reinvesting and trying to enhance the production and the future stability of those systems and those irrigation.
There's a cascade effect. Potentially.
Yeah.
Senator, I can point you to the report that was done that Ms Connell made mention of. So it's called the Independent Assessment of Social and Economic Conditions in the Basin, and that's the Sefton Review report as it's often referred to. And Minister Pitt released that on the 4th of September 2020, which was part of the announcement of no more buybacks because of the impact on the communities as amplified in that report, and announced the communities investment package, which is about putting the communities back at the centre of the basin plan to avoid the sorts of impacts that Dr Derham mentioned.
Final question from me. What power does the Commonwealth actually have to take water allocations away from the states?
So we have the legislation in place that requires the basin plan to establish an environmentally sustainable level of take. And as part of that, the Australian government made a commitment to ensure that we can reduce that consumptive demand down to that sustainable level of take. And so the basin plan sets out what the water recovery target is by saying we need to come to this level of take, and so the difference from where we were to where we need to be is set out in legislation. And in the basin plan, Schedules 3 and 4 of that basin plan set that out by the individual resource units for both surface and groundwater systems. And so that's the legislative base in terms of the sustainable level of take that's required. And then how the governments go about doing that. The Australian government made the commitment to, in terms of a policy decision, to come in and work with both the communities and the state and territory governments in the basin to facilitate that transition to that. And we've used a suite of initiatives to do that, both buyback, infrastructure-related projects as well, since 2009.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Antic. Senator Patrick.
Thank you very much. Just want to ask questions in relation to the appointment of a new CEO to the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. I don't know whether I direct this at you, Secretary, but can you just describe the process that the government went through in relation to that particular appointment, so advertising and...
Senator, as you're aware, the previous CEO, Philip Glyde, advised the Minister back in November about his planned retirement from the public service and as CEO of the MDBA, and effectively what has happened is that Mr Glyde has retired as CEO, has returned to the department as a senior officer, but he's on long service leave prior to his retirement, so he's not coming back to work. And I think I acknowledged last time his service over many, many years. We went through the standard process associated with the merit-based selection of APS agency heads. The position was advertised in the national press and on APS Jobs, and we engaged an executive search firm to assist running the process and to, beyond applicants who simply responded to the advertisements, to identify any other suitable
So can I ask what date the ad was, just to get some finer detail?
Let me just check here, Senator. The advertisement appeared on the 7th of January on APS Jobs and online, on Seek and LinkedIn, and on the department's website. And it was advertised in the national press and the Fin Review and the Australian on the 14th, 15th of January.
Okay, and I won't go to personal details, but how many respondents to the ad and also through the executive search request?
The numbers who responded, we received 19 applications, and an additional 5 people approached by the executive search firm expressed their interest in the position.
Can I ask...
so a total of 24 people were considered for the role.
Now, Mr McConville is the...
he was one of the people who applied for the role.
Okay, so he's one of the 19? Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, can you then take us through the rest of the process?
Yeah, for sure. We established applications closed on the 30th of January, and through February and early March we went through the standard process of shortlisting, interviewing, referee checks, and endorsement of the process by the APS Commissioner.
Okay, sorry.
The selection panel...
Sorry, we is the APS Commissioner and someone else?
We is the selection panel, Senator, chaired by me,
yep.
And consisting of the Chair of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, Sir Angus Houston, the Public Service Commissioner, Mr Peter Walcott, and a very senior former retired public servant, Ms Anthea Tinney. And we then went through that process together and ultimately provided advice to the Minister.
Okay, so of the 19 or 24 people, how many did you down select to present to the Minister?
7 people were interviewed by the panel. Ultimately, we determined that 3 of those people would be suitable for the role, and we provided that advice to the Minister as to those 3 people.
And what date did you provide that to the Minister?
Let me check as to whether I have that. About the 23rd of March.
And on what date was a decision made as opposed to an announcement?
The Minister then needed to identify from those 3 his preferred candidate, which he did. He needed to take that into the Cabinet process, which he did, and it then
following that cabinet, which I think from memory was the day before the budget, so it would have been last Monday week. It then went to the Federal Executive Council meeting about last Thursday from memory.
So it has to go to the Governor-General, is that?
Yes, it is. It's a statutory appointment.
Okay. So the process is the Minister makes a recommendation to Cabinet.
Yep.
Cabinet endorses the recommendation, Federal Executive, then the Governor-General appoints.
Well, the Executive Council is sort of chaired by the Governor-General, and that's the formal decision to make the appointment.
The constitutional.
The Minister then subsequently announced the appointment.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, the salary, I think, of Mr Glyde was something around 450, or not salary, but the total package that's in the annual reports. What's the package that's been offered
determined
to?
by the Remuneration Tribunal,
Sure.
and the total remuneration package is $443,390.
Okay, now that was certainly the package that was reported in the annual report for Mr Glyde. Is there any, I mean, Mr McConville will spend a lot of time getting up to speed. There's a lot of difference between mineral research or exploration and the Murray-Darling Basin, which is a complex beast.
Without wanting to sort of go into the decision, the panel was very satisfied as to all three candidates.
Sure.
And Mr McConville was certainly someone that we regarded as being a very outstanding candidate. And his background, while over the last couple of years has been involved in that particular industry that you refer to, he's actually got a much longer background in agricultural and indeed has worked for the Victorian Premier's Department in this area. So.
Okay. So my question is not intended to be in any way negative. It's an accepted proposition that someone takes on a job and actually over time gets more experienced and maybe gets
look, I think you could say that with many jobs. It's a appointment for a number of years. Mr McConville and the other two candidates we all regarded as fine people who could undertake the job. Everyone brings slightly different background and experience to it. I certainly, as will Sir Angus, as will others, work with Mr McConville as he settles into the role of being an agency head and as he becomes familiar, which I'm absolutely confident with the issues associated with the Murray-Darling Basin. Indeed, at interview, he displayed a very good understanding of those issues just from his own research. So.
Okay, and so the reason I made that comment is sometimes you look at the annual reports and it'll say a band 3 gets a range of X to Y, but it's not the case for this.
Well, this is a Remuneration Tribunal position, so you get what you get. So.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask one question of Mr Reynolds, because I'm just mindful of my time block, and I think I can get this one in the allocated time. Mindful of the ruthless chair that we have.
Indeed.
Mr Reynolds, and we'll declare, I did see you in the cafe and I did warn you I was going to ask this question, so there's nothing improper about that. It allows them to prepare. At the last estimates, you made a statement that the volume of flow from the northern basins of the Murray is around 14%. And floodplain harvesting is a much smaller component of that. Changes to floodplain harvesting have a minimal impact on the Murray system. I'm just trying to get a feel for, firstly, the 14% number, that differs from previous numbers that have been bandied around of somewhere between 39 and 41%. So can you just help the committee understand the difference between that number and what you gave to the committee last time?
So that number is based on the modelling that was undertaken for the basin plan and has been continually reviewed since
the 14% or the
14%. So,
41.
And the way that has been calculated, the flows in the Murray, and these are average flows, the average flows in the Murray at Wentworth, so just downstream of the Darling Junction, are about 7,200 gigalitres a year, so just over 7,000. The average flow at Batundi, so the point just upstream where the Darling comes in, is
Yep.
about 900 gigalitres. So that calculates to about 13 or 14% of the flow. So the flow in the Murray, about 14% of that is contributed on average from the Darling system.
Okay, and to help me out here, in terms of the floodplain harvesting, what sort of numbers are being talked about in terms of take in respect of floodplain harvesting?
So in the original basin plan, the floodplain harvesting volume was estimated to be 46.3 gigalitres. In the New South Wales interim, what they put forward in their water resource plans in 2020, which are now being reviewed again, that was increased to 243.9 gigalitres, reflecting a better understanding of the processes of floodplain harvesting. That when the basin plan was formed, it was always recognised that the understanding of floodplain harvesting was limited, and there would be better estimates of that come forward in due course.
Okay, so in terms of the argument that's taking place in New South Wales about floodplain harvesting and what is proper and what's not proper, of the 243 gigalitres, what's the argument being talked about in New South Wales?
So that's the revised estimate of the volume of take that has the volume that has been taken by floodplain harvesting at the moment under current practice. So that's the volume that would be reflected in the baseline diversion limit. New South Wales has recognised that will need to be, to come within their SDLs, they will need to reduce take, and they've committed to winding back floodplain harvesting to some extent.
To how much? What number will that
Well,
change to?
we're yet to see that come forward in their settled water resource plans, so we're still waiting to see that, but we're anticipating that there will be, I don't have the numbers for how much that will be changed. I think an important thing to recognise with floodplain harvesting is that it is water that's out on the floodplain. There is some uncertainty as to how much of that water would make it back to the river if it wasn't taken for a productive use as well. So it's not as simple to say, you know, if there was no floodplain harvesting, there would be another 243 gigalitres at the end of the system. That's not how that system works.
And I understand it's quite complicated as well, through ground water as well. So, but in terms of that 243 gigalitres, what sort of quantum of change? So I know you're saying you don't know the answer in terms of what would be in the water resource plans. But have you got a rough quantum? I mean, I just want to get a feel for what the likely variation is there.
I might just check with one of my officials. I'll just ask Mr. Goods, who might have a bit more detail on that.
Thank you very much. And this will be my last question.
That's good.
No.
Tim Goods, Executive Director, MWA. Senator, your question was about the change?
Yeah, the quantum of change from the 243 gigalitres back to, what sort of variation are we looking at if we look at the extremes of what's being proposed under the water resource plans, noting New South Wales has to make an adjustment?
So as Mr Reynolds said, we don't have the versions of the water resource plans for those 5 valleys as yet.
You did have them, didn't you?
The 243 number is the number that was in the versions that were submitted in 2020, which was subsequently withdrawn. And we would expect that there'd be some change in that number because we know that while we haven't seen the product, we do know that there's been more work undertaken to embed modelling improvements. And those modelling improvements incorporate things like the significant body of work that New South Wales has done to better understand, or to a greater level of precision, the volumes of storages that are in that part of the basin. done a lot of work over the last few years to understand that, because this has obviously become far more important to understand at a greater level of detail.
Sure. Yep.
So I would expect that it'd be around the same sort of magnitude, and they would come as suggestions or proposals to amend the baseline diversion limit. New South Wales has already said quite publicly that they have discovered through that work that there has been growth beyond what they believe is a reasonable baseline diversion in at least the Guida Valley, the border rivers, and they intend to address that through their licensing regime, and that would involve a reduction in the licence use back to the sustainable diversion limit, which links from that baseline.
Well, the New South Wales water resource plans were delivered late. Obviously, they've been rejected or sent back. When do you expect those 5 plans to be back with the MDBA for consideration?
So the New South Wales Minister and the Commonwealth Minister have agreed, have an agreement that New South Wales will lodge their plans by the 30th of June 2022.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Senator Patrick. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for attending today. My questions are to the Minister. As I've recently raised in the Senate, there's still a need for public register of interest in water rights and the trading of those rights. I was recently told that the states were creating such registers, but the transparency of these registers remains unseen. Now, the Federal Water Act 2007 requires the Federal Register in 3 places in the Act: Section 10H, Section 26 and Schedule 3. Much speculation remains about the ownership of these rights, particularly by traders who simply invest in water rights as an opportunity to make profits, without the connection to a need for water, such as the interests of a farmer. Now, in these questions, I want to make it clear, Minister, that you have earned Senator Hanson and respect and trust, and same with me. So I'm not maligning or implying anything about you in any way. In my dealings, you've always shown integrity, but these are serious issues. I can't say the same for the Morrison-Joyce government. First question is, if a minister or parliamentary member or close member of their family owns water rights as part of their investments, should not that parliamentarian disclose those interests and withdraw from voting on any associated motion or bill before the Parliament?
Well, Senator, obviously the individual circumstances to go to the substance of the issue of your question would need to be known. Obviously, every member of the Parliament, every member of the government must comply with the requirements in terms of disclosures, and I'm sure that they do. But in the absence of knowing this, any specifics of any particular situation, I really am not in a position to comment further than that.
If that parliamentarian does not withdraw from the vote, is there not a substantial conflict of interest?
Well, as I said, it would turn on the individual circumstances, and I'm unaware of if you have a particular example or whether you're just generalising. But as I said, there are a very strict set of guidelines in relation both to all politicians, but particularly those that are in decision-making roles, as ministers particularly, of requirements in terms of disclosures in relation to any interests that they may have across a broad range of areas. So I would expect that every member of the government, and I would hope every member of the Parliament, would be complying with their obligations in relation to disclosures.
Do you know of any parliamentarian, or particularly any senator or their close family, who have an interest in water rights?
Look, off the top of my head, no. Until 2018, I was a water entitlement holder. I had a property, and that property had water rights. I had water for that property, of which I registered on my register of interest. And I'm sure there probably are other members of the Parliament that probably are irrigators as well, but I don't have any specifics that I can...
The ACCC Water Markets Report says in preparing an amendment, it the Water Act says, in preparing Section 46(2), in preparing an amendment of the rules referred to in item 12 of the table in subsection 22(1), the authority, Murray-Darling Basin Authority, must obtain and have regard to the advice of the ACCC. The ACCC says in its Murray-Darling Basin Water Markets Inquiry Report, April 2021, there is a lack of quality. First of all, the title is Problems with Trading Transparency. 1, there is a lack of quality, timely and accessible information for water market participants. 3, trading behaviours that can undermine the integrity of markets, such as market manipulation, are not prohibited. Insider trading prohibitions are insufficient, and information gaps make these types of detrimental conduct difficult to detect. This confirms that the Inspector General will have trouble doing his job without that register now. In 2009, the Australian Government committed $56 million to the project of getting a federal water trader and register up, and it's estimated that about $30 million was spent on that project before it was just put aside, failed. The Murray-Darling Basin gave up trying. New South Wales Farmers Federation, Farmers' submission to the ACCC Water Markets Inquiry said, improvements in the transparency of water trade are urgently required. Readily available information, including price, location and volume, provide market participants with the information required to make informed decisions. Without transparency and improved functional capacity, trust in the water markets and wider water reforms is being eroded. The ACCC said, interim report, these services are a crucial source of market data and information. So there has been much public speculation that prominent senators or close members of their families have interests in water rights related to the Murray-Darling Basin. Do you know of any truth to these concerns?
Well, as I said previously, no, I don't, Senator, but I don't know whether any of the officials may have some information in relation to the transparency of water rights. I mean, all I can reiterate, Senator, is that, I know everyone that I know in this place takes their responsibilities in terms of disclosure very, very seriously, and I would like to think that everybody who needed to disclose an interest in something would. But in relation to the more general issues around the water market, I don't know whether Ms O'Connell might like to add to that.
Certainly, thank you. And we can certainly talk to the ACCC review report that was released in March 2021 and the government's responses and actions in response to that ACCC report on the water markets in general. If you'd like us to talk to that, I'll just ask Ms Connell.
Thank you, and my apologies, Chair, I neglected to introduce myself last time. Rachel Connell, First Assistant Secretary, Water Division. There is a process that's been established by Minister Pitt to look at the very substantial recommendations that were made by the ACCC, which we discussed at the last hearing. So Darryl Quinlivan is the Principal Advisor overseeing that process. He is working closely with basin states and stakeholders to look at how the recommendations from the ACCC can be progressed. He released his initial advice in December last year, which outlined 5 recommendations. The government has committed as part of the 22-23 budget to fund 4 of those recommendations. Several of those recommendations go to the issues that you've raised today, Senator, so improving compliance and integrity, so a proposed code of practice for water market intermediaries and implementing prohibitions into Commonwealth legislation. There are about 15 recommendations around transparency and integrity in the ACCC report, so they go to many aspects of the way water markets currently operate. Mr Quinlivan is working closely with states who are primarily responsible for water markets to progress some of those transparency recommendations. So looking at requiring information to be loaded into portals to clearly explain trades and the way delivery is managed. So recommendation 15, transparency of allocation decisions and the drivers for water availability. So there is quite a power of work going on with basin states and territories to progress those recommendations. Mr Quinlivan is due to provide his final report in June this year.
So for those first set of measures that Ms Connell outlined, in the March budget there was $2.1 million allocated to deliver on those initial measures.
Will there be a federal water trading register?
No, the ACCC didn't recommend a federal trading register. That they recommended increased transparency and the creation of a basin-wide water markets agency. But there will be there are several recommendations that go to improving the way information is recorded in those registers and the way that information is collected and made available to the public. So that's improving transparency and the ability to get information about water trades and the water market are key aspects of the work that's being progressed.
So they did recommend Commonwealth, if you like, legislation around the markets, but not actually, as Ms Connell said, a register. So, you know, to do things like a basin-wide mandatory enforceable water market intermediaries code is one example, and Commonwealth legislation to prohibit insider trading and market manipulation.
Minister, did you hear what I just heard? I asked a simple question. Will there be a federal water trading register? The immediate answer was no. That's a requirement of the Water Act. It was effort that was invested into the $56 million was allocated to providing the federal water trading register, and it was given up after $30 million was flushed down the toilet, and we still don't have one. Now we're coming up with codes of conduct and all the rest of it, but the Water Act says we must have it.
Senator, we've discussed this at a couple of previous hearings. There's no current requirement in the Water Act for a federal register in relation to water trades. And the ACCC didn't recommend a federal water trading register.
That's not my understanding of the Act.
Well, I can take it on notice and confirm that.
Thank you. If you could make reference to your understanding of Section 10H, Section 26 and Schedule 3.
Thank you, Senator.
And Minister, if the public registers were in place, I would not need to raise these questions, and farmers would have much more confidence in the system and the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, which they don't have at the moment.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Senator?
I think
Question
there was a
is,
statement.
if the public registers were in place, I would not need to raise these questions, and farmers would have much more confidence in the system and the Murray-Darling Basin. Can you see that?
Just clarify that there are state-based registers. They are in place.
The Water Act requires a federal register, and only the federal register will provide complete transparency across the basin. There's too many places for people to hide. 10H, 26 and Schedule 3. And Minister, this is a question directed to the Labor Party as well, although they're not in office. But I introduced amendment to legislation. It was voted in favour in the Senate and went to the House of Representatives. The Labor Party supported my amendment. Crossbenchers supported my amendment. In the lower house, the Labor Party turned and voted against my amendment, and the Liberal National Morrison-Joyce government voted against the amendment for creating a Water Act.
Yeah, Senator,
creating a Water Act.
Yes,
creating a water trading
clarify.
register.
Yes. Senator, I hear what you're saying in relation to the efficient, effective and transparent operation of the water market. And what I'd be really keen for officials to go away and do, because I'd be interested in it myself, is how they believe that we are able to achieve the kind of transparency and operation of the market that you're seeking to do. And I know Mr Quinlivan, who was previously the Secretary of this department, who knows, has a long-standing history in the understanding of the water market, is working on this, and would seek to provide you with a briefing as to an explanation to the questions that you've just asked, and then certainly be keen to talk to you after you've had the opportunity to have a look at the work that Mr Quinlivan's done, in the hope that maybe some of that explanation can allay some of your concerns about the transparency in the operation of the water
Thank
market.
you. A water trading register, federal, would allay my concerns, concerns of many farmers.
What I'm saying is that maybe they can be allayed by some other means. I'm not saying that they will,
Well,
but
then there's still compliance with the Act.
Yeah, give it a go.
We'd be very happy to do that briefing with you, because the ACCC review report's all about providing that transparency and trust. So,
Yep. And we want to ensure compliance with the Act as well. But we'll look forward to talking with you.
okay.
Thanks, Senator Roberts. Senator Grogan.
Thank you, Chair. Could I get an update on how much of the 450 gigalitres of water promised to South Australia has been delivered to date, and how much has been contracted? Same question as last time.
Same answer, I suspect.
Huh?
Same answer, I suspect.
I suspect. But I live in hope, Rex. I live in hope.
That's a good question, Senator.
The state's live.
Sorry, Senator, just
That's all right.
getting myself organised here for you. So an update in terms of where we were from February. I can go through that for you this morning. So at the last hearing, we said that we had contracted 18.5 gigalitres of water recovery. Subsequently, another, and my references are in long-term annual average yield, just for the record. The New South Wales Murrumbidgee Irrigation Automisation Finalisation Project was approved and is now contracted. That is bringing 5.5 gigalitres into the mix. And we are currently under active assessment for another 3 gigalitres, and they're very close to...
For another, sorry, Chair, 3?
3. So that would take our total to 27.
How much does the environmental water holder actually have registered? Is it still
Yes,
2?
it's still the 2. As we start to move through the milestones of the contracted projects, the water entitlements will be transferred at different stages. But all water licences must be transferred by and before the 30th of June 2024.
It's a pretty big task if you're still only on the best assessment at 27 and on your contracted assessment 23. 4. And of that 5.5 that you said that you've just recently contracted, when do you anticipate seeing any of that water?
Oh, I'd have to go back to the contractor, beg your pardon. I'll get that for you at lunch.
Thank you. So with the, you gave us a list of pathways, if you will, for the 450 last time we were here. Is there any more detail on that? Have you made any more progress? Because the list didn't actually, didn't really have much detail. A lot of it was...
High level.
Yeah, kind of the vibe of the thing, almost.
I know, it's an action plan.
How's that action plan going? Are you making any progress?
We are making progress, Senator, and I'm happy to give you an update on the works that we have been continuing to do. So as you would recall, the program is obviously user demand driven. So what we have done as an agency is that we're actively working with delivery partners in the basin governments, and we continue to pursue those conversations as the action plan set out. And just to go through where we are, obviously I've just mentioned for New South Wales, the Murrumbidgee Irrigation Automisation Finalisation Plan has now been contracted, which is a good outcome for everybody. And we have also contracted New South Wales with $5 million to help facilitate them in progressing some feasibility studies for prospective projects. And in that prospective project list that we're actively negotiating at the moment are potential off-farm projects in West Koorugan, further projects in the Murrumbidgee, Romani, Moira and Bringen. So there are 5 projects that we are hoping to get feasibility studies over the next few months in from New South Wales that will also facilitate more water recovery. And I would like to say that the West Koorugan is probably going to be a substantial project. It's probably one of the last remaining irrigation districts that has had very little infrastructure improvement upgrades done on it. So that's definitely been progress with the New South Wales Government as we speak. Further works in New South Wales is that we've continued our discussion with New South Wales in relation to urban and industrial projects, as we said that we would in the action plan. And by way of an example, in New South Wales, the types of industry projects that we have been negotiating on are abattoirs and the reuse, recycling and reconfiguration of farms and abattoirs. That brings obviously challenges in the fact that the reconfiguration is happening on farm, but we have provisions to support on-farm works, and also the nature of the entitlements. They're generally very low entitlement type products, but notwithstanding that, we're continuing those discussions to see whether we can get a prospective project out under that. And New South Wales had done some scoping work with their councils for urban water savings projects. We are reinitiating our discussions with New South Wales. The councils coming out of the back of the drought had said, please go away, leave us alone. Every drop of water is critical. For towns, if they can find a saving, they would like to keep it for the town and future water supplies in towns. But notwithstanding that, we are continuing to assess with the New South Wales Government if there aren't any councils who are willing to come forward in New South Wales to do urban projects. And you may have recalled, just as I updated the panel before, we have been working with the South Australian Government on urban projects. There are 7 councils in South Australia who have prospective stormwater reuse, recycling projects that they're working through. We have one of those 7 council projects under active assessment at the moment, and it's a good pilot for how those types of projects may roll out for other councils in South Australia as well. So we are making progress with some of those urban projects in South Australia as well. In relation,
A bit more progress in New South Wales would be nice. You know, a little upstream activity would help.
Certainly, and New South Wales has done the work to identify those prospective urban projects. It's just whether or not the councils feel that they can, forfeit that water for the environment over the townsfolk. And I guess that's the challenge that we're facing with some of these projects, is that willingness to come forward that way. But notwithstanding that, we are doing everything we can to encourage and work with New South Wales on those projects.
So,
Senator, did you want us, sorry to interrupt, but did you want us to finish with the other jurisdictions as well?
Just in terms of the action plan?
Just in terms of the
sure,
action
just
plan and
briefly, that would be great.
The state-led off discussions that we're having, and then of course there's the...
Or maybe
off-farm
I am
grants.
conscious of time. Maybe you want to put that on notice, but you're assuring me that there's progress.
We are continuing with the progress, and as I've mentioned, there are a number of projects that we are continuing those discussions and negotiations on how we can get projects submitted for assessment. So we are definitely making progress against that action plan.
Okay. And what level of confidence do you have for the delivery of the 450 gigalitres that we started the conversation with?
Level of confidence in,
delivery by 2024?
I'm ever the optimist. If we can get the stakeholders willing to come and work with us, we have a greater chance of continuing to progress against the 450. In terms of what total volume we'll get, it's challenging. We've got a lot of stock and domestic opportunity projects. Again, lots of work for small amounts of water. Can we actually get big town industry to come to the table? We're continuing those discussions. They're really our prospective areas, and we'll continue to pursue those.
Okay. Now, there's the cap on buybacks was at 1,500 gigalitres. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's legislated.
Yep. And on the authority's website, we see 1,231.1 gigalitres has been recovered by tender program. In other words, through some form of buyback. Do you want to bring the right person? Thank you.
Yes.
So is that is an accurate figure I'm using there?
The figures on the authority website, yes, are accurate at the time that they're published.
Okay. So that 1,231.1 gigalitres is recovered by tender program, which is a buyback. Are you on track to meet the cap on the water recovered through buybacks?
Senator, it's a cap, not a floor.
I know, but I'm just asking, do you think you're going to get to that point?
So thank you for the question, Senator. So the surface water bridging gap target is 2,075 gigalitres. To date, 2,106.4 gigalitres of water has been recovered towards that target. In terms of the specific targets that operate in different water resource plan areas, there is still 46 gigalitres, so only 2% of the overall target to be recovered. The bulk of that water is in the Condamine, Ballon, Bowen, Darling, Namoy and a couple of other catchments. So we're right at the end of the process. We've actually gone quite significantly over the global target, but we are working with Queensland in particular around options for water savings through the off-farm efficiency program framework to recover the remaining water in the Condamine, Ballon. So the key thing to keep in mind is that the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder currently has a surface water holding of 2,100 gigalitres, with the overall basin-wide target being about 30 gigalitres less than that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Senator Grogan. Senator Davey.
While we're talking about 450, can I just clarify, is there anywhere in the Basin Plan or the Water Act or the Water for the Environment Special Account that says the 450 is for South Australia?
No, Senator.
Thank you. You mentioned that currently we've got just over 2,100 gigalitres of water that's been recovered.
That's right, surface water.
Surface water. So where would this claim... So when the Adelaide Advertiser says that Mr Anthony Albanese has said just 2 gigalitres has been returned to South Australia, that is not correct. 2 gigalitres for South Australia.
No, across the basin, as I said earlier, in relation to the bridging the gap surface water target, the Commonwealth Environmental Water currently holds over 2,100 gigalitres of water.
Just as a point of follow-up, if that's all right, the 2 gigalitres is what's been delivered, the only thing that's been delivered from the 450, is that correct?
Yeah, so the 450 is an additional water recovery target on top of...
Just to be clear, in terms of...
So this has been taken out of context, is what you're saying? When Mr Albanese is reported in the Adelaide Advertiser today saying just 2 gigalitres has been returned to South Australia under the coalition,
Yeah, of the
it
South
should have
Australian
been reported,
450.
but it's not South Australia's 450. This, what I'm trying to clarify, the 450 is not for South Australia, is it?
That's written by journalists, not by Anthony Albanese.
And that's why I'm saying, so the report has been
Press
taken out
release
of
does actually have that
context.
point of clarity in it, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you for that. This week, Lisa Neville, the Labor Water Minister from Victoria, had an opinion piece in the Weekly Times. She has said the plan allows for but doesn't mandate water recovery of an additional 450 gigalitres. Is her interpretation of the Basin Plan correct?
So there's a comprehensive framework in the Water Act to provide for funding for recovery of the 450 gigalitres of water within a particular period of time. So, but in terms of compliance with that framework, it's, as Dr Durham indicated previously, it's a demand-driven program. It's incumbent on states and territories, irrigation infrastructure operators and other proponents to willingly come forward and propose projects for funding.
And my understanding of the basin plan is that the 450 is not necessarily mandated, but the limits have changed, plus or minus, I'm going to get it wrong, 5% on the sustainable diversion limit is the compulsory part of it.
And I can ask Mr Reynolds to walk you through, or Mr Goods, the way that framework operates in more detail.
Senator, I would add to that there has been a long-standing bipartisan commitment to the delivery of the plan in full, but delivery of the plan in full in a way that acknowledges the economic, the social and impacts and environmental impacts on the entire system. And so, we as a government, and obviously you're a member of it, remain absolutely committed to the delivery of the plan in full. But we are as committed, and as Ms Durham said earlier, or Dr Durham said earlier, we will do it in a way that doesn't destroy our river communities. But I'm confident, as she is confident, that we'll be able to achieve this through off-farm measures, and particularly some really new and exciting urban and industrial opportunities to make sure that we do it in a way that doesn't destroy the very fabric of our river communities.
And thank you. Just before we go to Mr Reynolds, thanks for raising that, Minister, because there was, and Lisa Neville also talks about it in this opinion piece, which I'm happy to table. The Basin Ministerial Council agreed to social and economic criteria for the 450, which in 2018, which included the South Australian Government and included the Victorian Labor Government, the federal government, and all jurisdictions. Although I now have read Terry Butler say that she'll walk away from that agreement, but Minister Neville, in this opinion piece, is concerned about walking away from that, and she says she will not be changing their position on delivering the basin plan respecting the social and economic criteria, and raises concerns about the 450 potentially exacerbating deliverability issues, which, Mr Reynolds, you might also be able to talk about deliverability issues as well.
Okay, so if it's okay, I'll just come back to the limits of change that you first mentioned. So under the basin plan, there can be the SDLs can be adjusted as a result of the SDL adjustment mechanism, the 605. But SDLs can be only adjusted a maximum of 5% up or down, so they've got to stay within the ballpark of the original assessment. For the full 605 gigalitre SDL adjustment to be achieved, there needs to be 63 gigalitres of efficiency measures in the other direction to keep us within those limits of change. So for the full 605, there requires at least 63 gigalitres of efficiency measures. That doesn't prevent more of the efficiency measures up to 450 being achieved. So that's that component. In terms of deliverability, certainly deliverability issues in the River Murray system are an area of intense focus of the MDBA and the states in terms of how we operate that system. There are challenges both delivering peak demands in the summer season for irrigation demands, but also integrating environmental water with that. I guess one of the issues with environmental water is it is typically the greatest volumes are delivered out of sync with irrigation demand, so through the winter-spring period. So greater volumes of water required for the environment don't necessarily exacerbate the deliverability issues that we're experiencing if environmental water holders want to use that water at a different period of time. Certainly there are other elements of the basin plan, like the relaxation of constraints that also facilitate greater flexibility in the operation of the system. So it all operates as a complete package.
And my understanding is there is a lot of work currently underway to look at both deliverability issues, but also looking at constraints and how we can manage them, and looking at the different sections of the river and how to manage water in and around those sections so that they don't have negative environmental impacts, as well as being able to meet all demands across the system.
Yeah, so operating the River Murray is particularly complex given the range of competing demands and the tributaries that flow into it, and the sequencing of flows from tributaries as well as from the major storages upstream. We've certainly got a significant piece of work underway looking at how we manage through the Barmah Choke in particular, but also how we might manage in the event that available capacity is tight, and to avoid a shortfall to consumptive users, looking at how we might move water through the system at different times of the year. The states are well engaged into the constraints relaxation program. That certainly will provide a much greater degree of flexibility for use of environmental water once that program's implemented.
Thank you. That's all for the moment. I'll have, after the break, I'll have questions for the environmental water holder too.
Thanks,
Chair,
Davey.
Yes. We have an answer to an earlier question that Dr. Durham took, if we could.
Thank you.
Just
and I'll
allow
just
her
get
to give that
agreement from the
answer.
committee that we'll table this document. Thank you.
Senator, you asked me the dates associated with the delivery of the Murrumbidgee contracted water. So against milestone 2 on the 30th of September this year, we are expecting to receive 2.425 gigalitres. These are in long-term annual average yield. For milestone 4, on the 30th of November 2023, we expect to receive 2.175 gigalitres. And for milestone 5, on the 9th of May 2024, we expect to receive 870 megalitres. So that's the 4.5 gigalitres in rough roundings.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Durham. Senator Walsh.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got some questions about the announcement of the appointment of Mr McVeigh as the chair of the new Modernising Murray River Systems technical panel. So hopefully the right people are at the table there.
Yep, we're ready to go, Senator.
Great, thank you. So Minister Pitt announced this appointment on Monday of this week. Was that a ministerial appointment?
Senator, Mr Pitt announced the appointment on 4th of April, so it was end of last week no, when's the 4th of April?
29th of March.
No, you're right, it's earlier this week, Monday, yep.
Yeah, the press release is dated Monday, yep.
So, Senator, you asked whether it's an appointment by the
Was
Minister?
it an appointment by the Minister, yeah.
Yeah, and it is, as you said, for the chair of a panel, and the panel's work was announced as part of the budget announcements, and yes, it is a minister's appointment.
Okay, thank you. And can you outline for us what the recruitment process was for that appointment?
So, Senator, it was a ministerial appointment to an independent panel. It's, as you're probably aware, common practice in relation to Murray-Darling Basin programs of work or issues or challenges to appoint independent panels with particular expertise to provide, look at options and provide advice. So in relation to this particular panel, the department provided the minister with a list of potential eminent people that had the leadership capacity to undertake the proposed review.
On what date did you do that?
I'd have to take on notice the date on which that particular advice was provided.
Was it in the last couple of weeks?
From memory, I think it was probably early March.
Okay, thank you. Does the position attract any remuneration?
Can I ask you to ask the question again? Sorry, you're a bit difficult to hear.
No problems. Does the position attract any remuneration?
So this, the appointment is for a panel that is part of 2022-23 budget measures. So if a contract, when the contract's put in place, it will commence from the 1st of July. In relation to these kinds of panels and engagements, the department, which is responsible for putting in place the contracting arrangements, is we're generally guided by remuneration tribunal standards. It's not a position that attracts the remuneration tribunal framework, but we use that as a reference point to guide the contract negotiations.
So the appointment has been made according to the press release. It's been announced that the package hasn't been finalised.
So Minister Pitt has announced it as part of a 22-23 budget measure. So the funding for that measure flows from the 1st of July. And we're yet to put in place a contract.
So the minister's announced Mr McVeigh for this position that doesn't start till July without a contract.
So we've had preliminary discussions with Professor McVeigh, but at this point in time, there's not yet a contract in place.
Right, and so you can't tell us what the remuneration for the position might be, albeit that
no, Senator.
Announced for the position. Okay. I can hear a bit of feedback there, so apologies for any difficulties in hearing me. You said that the department provided a potential list of people for appointment, probably in early March. The department would be aware then that Dr McVeigh is a former Liberal National Party minister in the Queensland government and a former coalition minister in the current government. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
The press release for the appointment from Minister Pitt refers to Dr McVeigh's strategic leadership roles, strong connections to regional Australia, professional background in the sector. The question for the minister is why would Minister Pitt not have included in Dr McVeigh's list of qualifications that he was a minister in the Queensland LNP government and a coalition minister?
Well, Senator, in having a look at the qualifications that Dr McVeigh has, I think that those that are particularly relevant and pertinent to the role that he's been sought to undertake have been listed on the resume and the minister's press release as to why Mr McVeigh has the necessary capabilities and experience to be able to undertake this role.
We've just heard from the department that an announcement was made on the 4th of April for this position, which won't take effect until July, and no contract has been entered into. Why would you announce a position on the eve of an election on Monday of this week for a position that doesn't start till July and you haven't entered into a contract for?
Well, I'm unaware of whether a contract has been entered into or not, and I'll take that on notice, Senator.
It's just been stated that it hasn't been entered into.
Okay. Well, as I said, I am unaware of that myself personally, and I will take that on notice and come back to you in relation to the contractual arrangements that have been agreed to or otherwise between the government and Dr. McVeigh. And so, in the absence of having a clear understanding of the process and where it's actually up to, I'm not going to pass any judgment or comment as to, the commentary that you're seeking to run here.
Minister, it's just been established in the committee today that the minister has appointed someone on Monday of this week, when an election is expected to be called this weekend, for a position that doesn't start till July, and that a contract, for which a contract has not been entered into. And this announcement has been made in the same week as the coalition has made many other rushed appointments to positions such as positions on the AAT. Do you accept that this really strongly appears to be just yet another job for the Liberal and National boys being announced in exactly the same week as many such other appointments have been announced?
Well, no, Senator, I don't. I think if you have a look at Dr. McVeigh's CV.
In fact, Professor.
He is Professor, I did get it right. Yeah, my apologies, Professor, Doctor. But obviously a very eminently qualified person, but not just eminently qualified, really specific skills and in the area that he's been sought to provide advice to the government through this role. So I think, if... I can't imagine there will be too many people in Australia with the kind of experience and skills that Professor McVeigh has for the role that he's been asked to undertake, or he is going to undertake, that would have better skills to do that role. So, Senator, I think this is an exceptional appointment, an exceptional person with exceptional skills who will be able to undertake this role probably better than anybody else in Australia. So, I don't accept the accusation or the allegations that you're making.
Minister, is it common practice of the government to make an announcement of an appointment 3 months before the role is scheduled to exist and without a contract being in place?
Well, certainly, Senator, it's not unusual for pre-announcements of somebody taking a position, it happens all the time. As I said, I'm unaware of the situation.
What happens all the time?
Senator,
sorry?
would you let me finish?
I just didn't understand what you said happens all the time.
The announcement of a position before it's taken up. I mean, it's almost always announced a position before the person starts in it. You don't announce somebody starting in a position after they've started. That would be quite unusual. But in relation to the contractual arrangements, in the absence of knowing the details of the process of those contractual arrangements, I'm not in a position to make any judgment. I said that I would endeavour to try and find out more detail and come back to you. but I don't think there appears to be anything unusual about this appointment. And as I said, you know, the credentials of the person who's been appointed to this position speak for themselves.
Can I just go back to the official who answered the questions previously and just ask again whether the contract has been entered into?
So we've had preliminary discussions with Professor McVeigh at this stage, but we haven't yet executed a contract with him.
And again, the position is expected to start, did you say in July?
Yes, but it would be common practice in terms of effective program delivery to have the contract in place before the measure commences. So that's what we're working towards.
When are you seeking to have the contract finalised? Do you have a date when you're seeking to have the contract finalised?
Not at this stage, Senator.
Right. I mean, given that we are about to be in an election period and government is about to go into caretaker mode, Minister, do you really say that this appointment, without a contract being in place for a position which will start in 3 months' time, is in the spirit of caretaker provisions?
Well, first of all, we're not in caretaker conventions because the election hasn't been called. But I'd go back to my, my comments in response to a previous question. Dr. McVeigh would have to be, if not one of the most eminently qualified people in Australia to undertake this particular role. And government should be, delighted that somebody of his skill level is prepared to take on this role. Governments of all persuasions have always operated within the caretaker conventions, and we will do the same. But there is nothing unusual about this particular appointment. As I said, it's a fantastic appointment, and there is nothing unusual with the process. It is a standardised process that you go through. So I'm sorry, I reject the assertions of what you're trying to imply.
I might just.
So can I just? I'm sorry. Please finish, and then I think we'll go for a break, and we can resume after a break.
I would just point out that the doctor, in terms of Professor McVeigh's qualifications, relate to a PhD, which focused on sustainable water use in Australian irrigated agriculture, and obviously one of the key focus aspects of the proposed review is looking at improving infrastructure in the Murray to improve availability of water to irrigated agriculture. So he actually has a PhD qualification that's relevant to the area of operation.
Senator Walsh, do you mind if we take a break and then we'll come back to this? Because we're...
I think
I would just
in the room, but I'm probably nearly finished.
Yeah, I just had one follow-up question.
All right. Well, so you've both got questions.
Jess, you finish.
Okay, Jess, you finish. Senator Walsh, you finish, and then we'll go for a break, please.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. My question is just, you've gone through Professor Dr. McVeigh's qualifications, and no doubt those qualifications are pertinent to the role. He is a former LNP minister in the Queensland government, and he is a former coalition minister in this government. Is that experience also pertinent to the role? And my question is for the minister.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what your question is, Senator.
My question was, is Dr. McVeigh's experience as a Queensland LNP minister and as a federal minister relevant to his capacity to perform this role?
Well, I think that...
Is it a pertinent qualification?
Senator, I think the relevant qualifications that Professor McVeigh has in relation to his experience that is listed in his CV are the relevant skills for the role that he's about to undertake.
All right, we'll go to a break and return at 20 past 11. Thank you. To Regional and Rural Affairs and Transport Committee, and Senator Walsh, had you completed your set of questions?
I have, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Senator Grogan.
Thank you very much. I might just one question to the Secretary. Just to come back to that issue we were talking about before the break. Given that the election must be called, and I think it is the next 10 days, and Murray-Darling is a point of contention between the government and Labor on certain points.
Correct you there.
Yeah.
We have always had a very, very strong bipartisan approach to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and you know, I commend 12 years ago when I think it was 14 parliaments, chambers of the parliaments of Australia came together, and they were all sorts of persuasions in terms there were some Liberal, some Labor, some with the crossbench holding the balance of power in them. And all of those chambers unanimously agreed to support the delivery of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan in full. So I would actually contend that there should not be any point of difference. We're all committed to the delivery of the plan in full.
Well, maybe I can just refine that a little and say that there are various members of the National Party, which is part of the coalition, who are not supportive, on record, as not being overtly supportive of certain aspects of the plan. Did you at any point provide advice on the impending caretaker conventions on the appointment we were discussing before the break?
Not specifically in relation to that appointment, Senator, but as is usual, the department has provided briefing to all its ministers in their office about the caretaker conventions, which of course commence when the writs are issued after the election is called. And
did that advise caution about making appointments so close to that, to the caretaker conventions coming into play?
I'd refer you to the guidelines issued by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and the department will of course strictly abide by those guidelines, and if there's any doubt we obviously seek guidance from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. But my understanding is that the decision has been made, the appointment has been made validly, and therefore it would be not inappropriate or no breach of the caretaker guidelines for action now to be taken to put that appointment in place. The same applies for other key issues, whether there's decisions about appointments or grants or contracts or whatever. This is a long-standing practice, and we'll treat this in the usual way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Grogan. Do you have another line of questions?
I do. I don't know if you wanted to.
I'm happy for you to continue,
Thank
Senator
you kindly.
Grogan. We'll continue back to Senator Patrick after that.
So we touched a little on water resource plans earlier, but I'd like to just further that conversation. So all the water resource plans from jurisdictions other than New South Wales have all been accredited and are operational, is that correct?
We'll just ask Andrew Reynolds to come back to the table to answer that question.
That's correct, Senator.
And am I right in saying that none of the New South Wales water resource plans have been accredited by the Minister?
That's correct. We have two that the MDBA is currently assessing.
Okay. And these plans were due in 2019?
That's correct under the Basin Plan, but agreement for extension has been made.
So the revised New South Wales plans, you were saying that two of them are currently being assessed by the authority, is that correct?
So we have two plans, the Border Rivers Alluvium Plan and the Lachlan Surface Water Plan are with the authority at the moment.
Okay. And what about the other plans?
So there's a schedule been agreed between Minister Pitt and the former New South Wales Minister for the remaining plans, or all plans, to be submitted by June 2022 this year.
So June this year. And do you believe that schedule will be adhered to? Does it look like they're on track?
So we're still working with the New South Wales officials on the preparation of those plans. We haven't been given any advice that they won't meet that at this point in time.
And how many plans are they to deliver by June 22?
20 plans in all.
20 plans. Does that include the 2 that are currently being assessed by the authority?
That's right, yes.
And so that assessment for 2 of those is underway. Have any of the plans been provided to the Minister yet?
No.
No. And do you feel, given that we are going to have a period of disruption through obviously an election and caretaker conventions and such like, do you feel that the June 2020 deadline will be met?
In terms of submission of the plans, we're working with New South Wales officials to work towards that deadline. We have the plans that we've got now. We'll continue our assessment of those over coming weeks and provide them to the Minister once we've completed that assessment, or a recommendation to the Minister at that point in time.
And what's the average time it takes for such an assessment?
So we've mapped out an assessment process. It's about 12 weeks per plan. We feel we can do 2 plans concurrently and commence another plan or another 2 plans every 4 weeks. So we'll progressively work through them in that way.
All right, so just to confirm, did you say they take 12 weeks or the entire 20 will take 12 weeks?
It takes about 12 weeks to assess a plan. We can do 2 plans concurrently, but once we have started on the first 2 plans, 4 weeks later we would be in a position to start the next 2 plans. So once we get through the first plan, then we would, every 4 weeks there would be another 2 plans the assessment would be completed for.
So by your own timeline, it's not possible to get the 20 done by June?
So the commitment is for the plans to be submitted by June 2020.
Right.
June 2022, and our assessment process will play out from there, but we'll progressively start assessing them as they come in. So there is a schedule for them, the commitment is for those to be progressively submitted up to that point in time.
So we would essentially be looking at, if everything went to plan, this all being completed in September?
Well, it'll depend exactly when the plans arrive with us. As I say, we can progress 2 plans concurrently in the assessment process, and as I say, every 4 weeks we would start another 2 plans in that. So if the plans come in progressively between now and June, we would work through in a time frame like that. But
okay. Obviously there's been extraordinary delays, and appreciate that extensions have been granted at each level, but we are going to be in a situation of being 3 years late by the time this is all completed. Are the delayed plans limiting our ability to stop the over-extraction of water?
So we have bilateral agreements in place with New South Wales, and previously had them with other states as well, for them to report their take, and we'll prepare a register of take, an interim register of take that reflects their usage, and we'll identify whether there is over extraction or not.
And does the Minister have any power to credit the plans if they haven't been through the authority for assessment?
So the authority will make a recommendation to the Minister. The Minister can act on that recommendation. The Minister could accredit a plan against the authority's recommendation, but would need to table his reasons in Parliament for that.
And has he ever exercised that
No,
option?
no Minister has.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Grogan. Senator Patrick.
Thank you very much. Now, I must admit I did miss some of the discussion in relation to the 450 plan, so I'd like to ask some questions about that if that's possible.
Certainly
Ms. Connell.
Dr Durham to return to the table for that,
Okay.
Senator.
So, firstly, I mean, the committee asked for the plan to be tabled. The first time around it was just rhetorical words. There's a bit more detail now, but this is your plan that the Secretary tabled in
Correct,
relation...
Senator, that's on the 18th of February, the Secretary tabled
That's correct. So this is the
that
plan. It's 2 pages involving $1.4 billion of expenditure. It just, you know, and look, it's better than the last one, but it falls short, I think, in any person's reasonable view, in that it does give some details as to measures. Now, I heard you say the Murrumbidgee Irrigation Automation Finalisation Project is actually contracted now to give 5.5 gigalitres. Did you end up giving to Senator Grogan these other items, or these other programs, feasibility funding for priority projects? I don't actually know what that means.
Okay, we did step through it with Senator Grogan. We're happy to do that again if that assists about
But did you detail each one of these lines and what you expect to be returned from them?
Well, we detail what's under contract
Sure.
and progress with a number of them. We didn't get all the way through. We only really focused on New South Wales, I think, and some of the South Australian projects. But if you'd like, we could go through the other states.
So, for example, the Minister last time raised the issue of urban and industrial water recovery or water efficiency measures. Yes. You've got that listed down. You don't have any details as to likely recovery amounts.
So I can provide you with an update, Senator, for those. So in relation to urban, we actually have in South Australia a current urban proposal with the Minister for consideration. It's one of 7 potential councils in South Australia who are likely to bring forward urban stormwater renewal projects, and they're in the order of between 1 and 5 gigalitres of prospective water recovery from the South Australian Minister's water entitlement portfolio, because those councils would draw less water from the River Murray. So it's a lessening of the demand on the River Murray in terms of generating those savings. So that's one of 7 that we have. It's piloting how those council proposals will be brought forward and assessed, and we're anticipating South Australia will bring forward in consultation with those relevant councils some additional submissions in the not too distant future. So that's an update on urban at the moment in South Australia, but I will also just reflect that we're talking to other South Australian counterparts, particularly on a Creeks pipeline. I'm not sure if you're aware of that project. It's new to my knowledge base, but it is one that we're actively in discussions with South Australia on. And you would be aware of the Barossa project, which has been kicking around for a little while, but there's also potential of considering some reforms in the Barossa irrigation system, again reducing the demand on the River Murray from that.
So how would you... how have you been advertising it? So I just think of a big water user in South Australia being GFG and Whyalla. Obviously, it was one of the reasons for the Morgan to Whyalla pipeline to be able to facilitate that steel production, which is very important. Has, for example, the department contacted GFG and said, "You're a big water user. If you could find some efficiencies, we could help fund that." Has that sort of interaction occurred?
So our partnerships with the Basin Government, so we are working in close consultation with the South Australian Government, New South Wales Government, Victorian Government, as well as ACT in Queensland, and they provide the interface with the industries and urban utilities in their jurisdictions. But we are proactively pursuing those opportunities with our delivery partners.
So, for example, is GFG in your list of potential water savers?
I would have to take that on notice with the team, but I'll get an answer for you in the next break.
So in some sense, that's the sort of detail I would expect, and I know that these involve commercial discussions, but just the fact that you're talking to an entity about water saving is not a commercially damaging piece of information, and so this plan, which we're slowly, it's like dentistry here for me, it's like root canal therapy, trying to get proper details out. I've got 3 pages. Can we break this down further into what you expect to get? It's a $1.3 billion program.
So I am currently working with my jurisdiction counterparts on a bit of a dashboard that provides that information of where the discussions are at, where prospective projects have been submitted and under assessment, and also those that have actually been contracted and delivered. So we are working to generate that next level of detail that you're asking for there, Senator. The challenge we face with the jurisdictions is that these are complex projects, and it does require willing partners to come to the fore and bring forward. So we might be in discussions, but they still might not be ready to share publicly that they're talking with us about those projects. So we do.
But there is no commercial. I mean, what I seem to find right across the spectrum, so it's not a criticism just of you guys, is that any time a company's mentioned, somehow that seems to be a block from disclosure. When in actual fact, the requirement in this forum is whether or not it would cause substantial harm to the business, as opposed to having someone just acknowledging that you're talking with a particular company about possibilities. That cannot be harmful to a company.
It's also expectation management.
Sure.
We're having lots of conversations, and many of them will fall through and nothing will come from it. So
what about the expectation management for South Australians who to just look and say, we've got 2 gigalitres with the CHU, and no one seems to be able to tell us how to get to a plan. And look, I'm trying to be fair.
100 gigalitres with the CHU.
Not of the 450. The evidence was 2, my understanding is the CHU can't use any of this water unless it's been properly allocated and transferred over for use, for environmental use. So, which is why...
They must hold the entitlement, you're correct,
that's, which is why, what you've said quite correctly is you've got these projects underway, but they're not booked into the CHU yet. You did mention in the last estimates that you were going to put some of this up on the internet. You said you were working on updating this sort of information on the internet. Has that occurred?
We've been pursuing that since the last hearing, and I've seen draft updates. We just haven't been able to get everything loaded in time for today, but we are very, very close, Senator, to having that information revised and updated in a user-friendly format, and also being more transparent, so getting some more of the reports and information made available as part of that. So there's been some third-party consultation with particularly our independent reviewers who do the independent technical assessment of the reports, of the submissions that come in from the governments. We'd like to publish those, but there is some commercial sensitive, so we have a process to work through to ensure we remove any commercial sensitive material from those assessment reports provided. But we have been pursuing that, and we're hoping to update imminently.
Okay.
So, Senator, we can... this document's the 18th of February, and since then things have changed, like the Golden Murray water, things like that have significantly changed. So what we can offer to do is take up notice and produce an updated version.
I think Senator O'Neill asked for that, saying every time we have estimates, maybe the committee needs to make an order that says every time you appear at estimates that you have updated plans in relation, or an updated outline of the 605 and the 450, because every time we ask about it and every time we find we're working with old data. But look, I think this is and I'll just go to the Minister here. This has at least got some detail about how the recovery might occur, and I wonder, I just think it's beneficial to have a perhaps more substantive document that shows what you think you might be able to get, how you think you might be able to get it, when you think you might be able to get it, because that I think would give people a lot more comfort. I know that Anthony Albanese is down announcing that he's going to get the 450 gigalitre. I've already put out the public call to say, no good announcing it, no good committing to it. You've got to have a piece of paper that says this is how we're going to achieve it. And this is very, very, very bare. So can I just...
Yes, Senator. Once again, officials, correct me if I'm wrong here. I think that what we sought to do in providing that document to you back in February was that it was at the end of an estimates, because, like you, I was very interested to see, particularly this new opportunity that exists, well, not new opportunity, but an opportunity that's currently being pursued by the department in relation to urban and industrial. It seemed to me like it was a clever additional mechanism by which we could get the water. And so I think what we did was we put together as quickly as possible an outline, but I can see there is absolutely no reason for what you've just asked for cannot be done in more detail. I'd perhaps suggest to the department, don't try and do it by 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah.
Maybe try and do it over the period of a couple of weeks. But I do think, if you have a look at, the opportunities that exist in terms of, alternative use for recovery through urban and industrial, there is a huge opportunity for us to actually get hundreds of gigalitres of water. It may be a bit trickier in the sense of you've got to negotiate with many, many different councils or organisations, businesses or sporting groups or whatever it happens to be. But it is a pathway, I agree entirely, it is a pathway by which we can get a substantial amount of that 450, hopefully the whole lot of it, in addition to the other measures that we're taking, so that we actually can deliver this plan in full, which I know is what every single person here wants.
Sure.
So what I will say is I'm happy to take it up with the Minister, but I think the officials here are all absolutely 100% prepared
And
to
I think a
get us
two-week
quickly.
time frame would be good because
Yeah.
this is a weapon that can be used against you,
absolutely.
and properly by senators who rightfully want to put pressure on governments and oppositions to make sure that they do the right thing or make sure that there's a solid plan there. So can I switch? Thank you very much,
A
Minister.
wholly reasonable request,
Sure.
Senator.
So we're happy to agree in 2 weeks' time to have something provided to the committee.
Maybe this afternoon come back when the time frame you think you can do
All
it,
right.
but I would
Yeah,
be certainly
that's-
urging you to do it as
reasonable.
quickly as you can, but make sure that it's a fulsome report so that Senator Patrick's got as much information as possible and the rest of the committee too.
Yeah. Can I ask?
Senator Patrick, how long's this next set of questions? Should we share the call and come back to you? Thank you, that's terrific. Senator Grogan, back to you.
Hesitated.
Yes.
You lose, buddy.
He who hesitates loses.
We're working together anyway, so it's okay.
It's fine.
For South Australia.
South Australia, hanging in.
3 of us, 4 of us. Oh, Perun.
Someone's got to stand up for the rest of the basin.
The rest of the basin's doing quite well comparatively. But yes, absolutely.
Just to respond to that, Senator Grogan, I'd like to commend successive governments in South Australia. I think South Australia has actually fared, very well, but there's been a really strong and united push from all sides of politics in South Australia. So I wouldn't actually say South Australia has fared badly. I think we've been very, very good in advocating and lobbying on behalf.
Oh,
of the
no,
people.
absolutely. That wasn't my point. Very much being the end of the system.
And the
We
only
are the
part of
Mexico
system
of-
that has a guaranteed water supply year on year, thanks to the
Smart negotiation.
The smart negotiation
Darling
of
agreement.
successive governments in South Australia, yes, which we're all very proud of.
Senator Grogan.
Okay, let us move on, or we won't be getting out of here.
Committee, isn't it? Because it is the one where the states actually line up
Yeah.
together
The Senate operating
in a
properly.
way. Yes, it's fascinating
It's what
for
the Senate
Queensland.
needs to
So-
do.
Yeah, over to you, Senator Grogan.
Floodplain harvesting. Have you agreed on an end of system flow rates for each of the planning areas in the Northern Basin that have to be reached?
I might get Mr Goods to add to this as well, but the in developing WRPs, the states have to give consideration to connectivity between connected systems. It doesn't require a specification of an end of system flow per se.
But it would be an indicator that would be useful to use?
It's a potential indicator, Senator, but it's not a required indicator.
And so it's
plan.
not an indicator that you use or that you turn your mind to?
No.
No.
Well, the plan, if it was in the water resource plan, it would be the work that New South Wales, as the relevant government, would undertake to put in their water resource plan.
Cool, which they would then provide to you,
Yes.
which has not been part of the assessment, or hasn't been part of how they've put together their water resource plans.
That's right. It was a recommendation from a New South Wales parliamentary inquiry that that be considered. So we wait to see the outcome of that.
Okay. Well, hopefully, because it is a good indicator. I think that's been agreed by a significant number of people that it is a good indicator. Under the plan, how much water on the floodplain would cotton growers, for example, as from my figures of 2016-17, the largest farm use at 28%, how much water would they be allowed to harvest from the northern Murray-Darling Basin?
Well, we don't, the plan doesn't dictate, and nor does an individual licence holder conditions dictate what purpose an extraction could be taken for. It would generally specify a volume, and the volume for which that's used is up to the entitlement holder.
Has there been any work done to sort of disaggregate that, to think about that in terms of the different uses? And I don't mean that in a sense of preferencing, you know, flowers, vegetables, sugarcane, whatever, cotton, in terms of how that's reported in terms of farm use?
Not by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. The obligation on states is to report use, aggregated use, not by particular crop type or industry type or anything like that. I'm sure within states and other agricultural industries, they would probably collate information themselves around industry use, but it's not something that is reported to the Murray-Darling Basin Authority as a requirement of the Basin Plan, so we don't have that information.
Yeah, no, it is...
Senator, if you'd like, I could, on notice, check whether ABARES has any of that type of information.
They do release that data. That's the data I'm looking at now.
Yeah,
they do have it.
Yeah, I'll certainly see if there's been any ABARES or other material that we could refer you to.
So how much floodwater have irrigators been taking through the floodplain harvesting since the Basin Plan was adopted in 2012?
So that there are limitations in terms of floodplain harvesters have an allowance, so there was a volume under cap in northern New South Wales and overland flow in Queensland, and one of the important parts of the reform is to better estimate and then licence, measure and monitor that take, and that's part of the challenge in the development of the water resource plans, to provide a more accurate estimate of the baseline level of take. And as we were talking about earlier, the latest best estimate that New South Wales has provided to the authority was in 2020, when the first draft water resource plans were submitted, and that volume was estimated to be approximately 243 gigalitres.
243. Mm-hmm.
That's for 5 valleys in the north of New South Wales.
Yeah. Okay. And more broadly? That's 5 valleys, you know.
Yes, in New South Wales there are only 5 valleys where floodplain harvesting is an activity. There are a couple in southern Queensland, and I don't have a disaggregated volume for overland flow in Queensland, but could provide that on notice.
If you could provide that on notice, please, that would be very useful. The Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists, after consulting the authority on the methodology and undertaking some adjustments for drought years and environmental water recovery, reported that actual river inflows into South Australia were 22% less than expected in the first 7 years of the Basin Plan implementation. Now that report, and I know you've seen it because it was provided to the authority, and the Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists met with the authority and department and various other people to talk through it. It was quite an alarming piece of work in terms of the difference, and accepted, I think, that the system needs tightening in terms of monitoring, metering, understanding where the water's going. But the difference was quite significant. at 22% running into South Australia. Do you have a sense of what proportion of loss is occurring into South Australia from that difference between what's estimated, what's assumed to be happening, and what's actually in the river system?
Just seeing whether Mr. Coleman has, or Dr. Coleman has any information on this, but sorry, you're saying, do we have an assessment of the loss in river flows? Just trying to...
So there was a significant piece of work done by the Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists, the methodology for which was negotiated or informed by negotiations with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, and various things were taken into account to make sure that it lined up and that it was a robust and piece of work that would be of use. And I'm just wondering, since then, I think that was 2019, since then, or 2018, 2019, have you done anything to actually assess the difference between what you're assuming is happening and when that detailed piece of work is done, what is actually happening?
Thanks, Senator. Dr. Matthew Coleman, I'm General Manager of Applied Science at the MDBA. So I think you're right. It was 2019 when that Wentworth Group analysis came out, and they did talk about a 22%, I think it was, shortfall. We have a few questions about that number. So we did talk to them about the process they went through in coming to that number. But one of the big challenges with that analysis is that they were using a long-term planning model to make that assessment, and that long-term planning model assumes that the basin plan is completely implemented, that it is fully rolled out, whereas in actuality over the last few years the basin plan has been progressively rolled out. So environmental water recovery and environmental water delivery has been progressively coming on board. So I think that 22% number that's got a fair degree of uncertainty around it, and so we wouldn't call that established science. So what we've done at our end is we conducted our own hydrological analysis, looking at the flows across the basin since the basin plan was implemented, and that came out in the basin plan evaluation that was released 18 months ago, so the end of 2020. And so what we found through that analysis is that the basin plan has increased flows through the river, and that we are seeing improved environmental outcomes because of environmental water delivery.
I think the one of the key things from that piece of work was the difference between what everyone believed to be the case and what was then identified through that. Even if you question part of the number, you dig further into that methodology, you can still get some concrete material out of that still tells you that there is a difference. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree, Senator, that there are useful components to that analysis that we've taken on board in our own analysis, but the challenge we're always facing with this type of analysis is essentially it's to unscramble the egg type of challenge. We know what the flows are in the River Murray, for instance, and the challenge is to then disentangle that flow and work out how much of that comes from environmental water, how much is lost. So there are useful components in the Wentworth Group analysis, but that challenge remains. There's still no definitive answer.
Cool. If we could go to Senator Walsh.
Well, we might go to Senator Davey and then Senator Walsh and then back to you. Thank you.
And before you disappear, Dr. Coleman, just on that, I think, have you done a comparison pre-basin plan to post-basin plan? And specifically, I'm also thinking of the really dry years, so like 06, 07 compared to, say, 17, 18, which were both extremely low. New South Wales had zero allocation years, and the flows that are going over to South Australia and the impact of particularly the outcomes at the lower lakes what the lower lakes were like in 06-07 compared to what they were like in 17-18?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. So we are seeing progressive improvements in lower lakes conditions in South Australia, but it's a long game. The Millennium Drought had a large impact on lower lakes health, and so we're seeing that as a multi-decadal recovery process. And so during the drought in 2017, 18 and 19, environmental water was the critical factor in the difference between in terms of how much water flowed over the border and into the lower lakes. Environmental water was the major contributor, and so that's a direct outcome of the Basin Plan in sustaining the health and sustaining that long-term recovery of the lakes.
So that's a good news story, though. So that's
right.
An indication that the Basin Plan, even though it is the recovery of the lower lakes is a long-term thing, it will take a great deal of time, but it's starting to have an impact. We're not going backwards.
That's right, Senator. It's a measurable impact that we're seeing over the last few years of sustaining the health of the lakes.
It's reassuring. Thank you. I have some questions for the department. Thank you. I want to talk about the Sustainable Diversion Limit Adjustment Mechanism projects. The Ministerial Council meeting last year agreed that some of those projects could be rescoped, and I'm specifically interested in the New South Wales projects. What actions have you been doing with New South Wales to bring forward rescoped projects at Menindee and Yanco Creek?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So we've been proactively working with New South Wales to progress rescoped projects at Menindee and Yanco Creek. They've put forward a draft proposal for us to consider, which we are currently reviewing and discussing with them in terms of requesting additional information. And I might ask Dr. Durham to provide a bit more information on the progress of those discussions.
Wait for Dr. Durham.
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Senator. Yes, we have been proactively working with New South Wales in relation to the packages that we received from Minister Anderson on the 28th of March. He has proposed a variation to what is New South Wales refers to as their Better Barker, Better Bidgie proposals, which there is information available on the New South Wales websites about. New South Wales, since late last year, has been continuing consultation with the communities, particularly in the Murrumbidgee, which relates to the Yanco Creek offtake project. We understand there's been some great constructive discussions. There's still some uncertainties about the nature of the project. More importantly, how infrastructure will be operated and the impact of different flows that may arise from that infrastructure changes. But notwithstanding that, there seems to be a greater level of support for where the Yanco Creek offtake project rescoping is heading. And the nature of the proposal really at this stage from New South Wales is more aligned with what the infrastructure will need to be. So at Yanco, it's about changing the weir height, for example, which is already publicly known, but there's greater support from the community now with where that's heading. As I said, the concern now is about the actual operating rules. In terms of the Menindee projects, again, we received some information about areas where there's prospective development to progress with the community. Obviously, there's various elements to the Menindee projects. It's quite a complex project and quite contentious with the communities. So at the moment, there's still some infrastructure changes being proposed by New South Wales associated with the Menindee Weir, potentially other works associated with Weir 32 and the Moulton Booker regulator. So we are actively working with New South Wales at the moment to ensure that we have enough information to understand the infrastructure proposals. The rigour, I guess, in terms of the infrastructure costs that they've associated with the proposal that came in at the towards the end of March there, which was in the order of $600 million.
Right, so they have proposed funding arrangements for these rescope projects. And did you say the department's considering those? What advice have you provided to the minister about these rescope projects?
Well, at this stage, we've been trying to understand the nature of the proposal that's come in. So we have, obviously, the Minister received the proposal and he has asked us to investigate that. We are doing that. We are also trying to work with the Treasury as well, because it's quite a substantial proposal that's been put for us. And we're continuing those consultations with the Treasury. The big thing that we've done since receiving that proposal was to engage an independent consultant, an engineering firm, to help us understand the infrastructure build and the proposal in terms of how they're going to continue to move towards a business case that gives us the confidence that the investment is sound and meets our due diligence requirements. So in terms of briefings to the Minister, we've been informing him of the steps that we're taking to ensure that we understand the proposal that's been provided and to go through the due diligence steps that we need to ensure that that's a value proposition. So
you have contracted an engineering firm, an independent engineering firm. Is that not duplication? Because would that not be something that New South Wales is meant to do because they're New South Wales projects? And so I'm a bit confused why we would need to contract out someone and do the work that New South Wales is meant to do in order to prove their business case.
It's standard practice for us to get independent advice to verify the submissions that are put to us from states. It's something we do in the off-farm efficiency program as well, and to contribute to the evidence base in terms of the funding proposal being value for money.
So at what... I'm trying to understand a timeline because the agreement to rescope was at the Ministerial Council last year. At what stage do we think we will see progress on these rescoped projects? When do you think we'll start to see them being implemented?
We acknowledge that New South Wales is running late in terms of the commitment that they gave last year, but as Dr Durham said, the Menindee Lakes project in particular is a very complex project in terms of stakeholder issues on the ground. So New South Wales has invested considerable effort and energy over the last 12 months of working with stakeholders in Menindee across a broad range of interest groups to get their buy-in to a proposed rescoped project. They've now given us, the department, an application to consider in terms of rescoping the project. We're working through that with them, and we're also focused on making sure there's no pause. So we currently have a funding arrangement in place with New South Wales for pre-construction funding, so we're working with them to make sure they can continue that stakeholder engagement, continue preliminary investigations, and look at getting altered arrangements in place to fund the altered proposal they've given us.
And so they gave you that proposal on the 28th of March.
That's right.
How long will it take you to assess it to give the Minister the advice as to whether it's an adequate proposal or not?
Well, as I indicated, it's quite a substantial investment, and we are also working closely with the Treasury to ensure that we meet their expectations in the level of due diligence associated with that. We also need to make sure that these projects actually continue to deliver on the Basin Plan outcomes. So there's quite a few lines of evidence we are working through. We are working as fast as we can, Senator. It's very hard to put a time frame on it at the moment. But as my colleague Ms Connell said, we're also working to ensure that New South Wales continues to work within the existing funding arrangements we have to keep progress going.
Yeah, I'm just concerned because I know we've seen the Productivity Commission recommend that the 2024 deadline for these projects be extended. Victoria and New South Wales have both indicated that the timeline is going to be tough to meet, and if we don't keep momentum going, they definitely won't meet the deadline despite the best efforts of everyone. So on that note, I'll hand over the call.
Thanks, Senator Davey. Senator Walsh.
I still have questions, but different topic.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got some questions about the recent reports around fish die-off in near Toowoomba. Do I have the right people there at the moment?
No, Senator, I'll just ask Mr Reynolds to come back to the table.
Okay, thank you.
Minister, why are you wearing a crow scarf?
I'm very hopeful that our collective team, senators from South Australia, will be victorious tomorrow in the AFLW final.
Oh, okay. That explains. I thought it was something as a result of the showdown.
No.
Okay.
No, and I...
Well, I fully support you.
Yeah, shout out to
Minister.
our girls tomorrow, 12 o'clock kickoff.
Absolutely.
Go the Crows.
Go the
We
Crows
all agree.
women's team.
We all agree.
That will all be very, very interesting in the transcripts.
But important.
You're outnumbered here, I'm afraid. There are more South Australians in this room than any other state.
Over to you,
I'm glad the
Senator
minister is supporting. Glad the minister is supporting the W. That's great. Media reports from earlier this week have raised the prospect of a Blackwater event in Kubi Dam near Toowoomba, possibly related to the floods in Queensland and New South Wales. Is the Basin Authority monitoring that situation?
So that's not a role directly for the Basin Authority, for MDBA. Management of those local Blackwater issues rests with state agencies. We've certainly undertaken throughout the season to assist with coordination across state agencies, but that specific issue would be a matter for the Queensland Government.
Yeah, and the question was just whether the authority is monitoring it and whether you would have any concerns. Any Blackwater or chemical contamination would continue further into the basin.
So once again, those water quality issues, direct management of those are things that state agencies manage. We do coordinate with state agencies, and we have published on our website an analysis of risks across the basin as an awareness exercise, so that communities can have, be forewarned about the potential risks of water quality issues like this. But the direct intervention and monitoring of specific events like that rests with the state agencies, as I said.
Okay, so your role is to identify the risk and communicate that risk to your stakeholders.
Yeah, well, we assist with that.
Whilst the state government has responsibility for managing it.
Well, we assist with that because there is a desire amongst stakeholders for greater transparency about these sorts of issues. But state agencies also will communicate directly about specific events and local issues like that, and so the Queensland Government would be handling that matter.
Okay, and I understand what you're saying. You did mention your role in kind of communicating risks to stakeholders. Is that one that is on your radar as something that should be communicated by the authority as a potential risk?
So we have published regularly update a map of areas of potential water quality risk across the basin, and we've been doing that across this season, given the extent of rain and flooding across the basin and the potential for Blackwater events and the like emerging from that. This specific event is not one that we've incorporated into that report as yet, given that it's only very recent. We update that report on a monthly basis, but it's more of a scan of the whole basin. as I said, a specific event like this and the communication of the specific details of it as it unfolds would rest with the Queensland Government.
Okay, I think that answer and explanation is probably going to apply to my next question, which is about the reports of invasive fish species also being reported in Kubi Dam. And it's reported that that is being managed by Queensland biosecurity officials. Is that in the same sort of category, that it's something that may make its way to your assessment and communication of risk in coming reports?
Yeah, that's in a similar vein. Our routine reporting has been around water quality threats as opposed to particular native fish. Non-native fish threat like that.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think I have any further questions on that line.
Thanks, Senator Walsh. Senator Patrick.
Thank you very much. The MDBA, I think, has just recently done a report into almonds, the growth of almonds. Is that correct?
So we've just recently published a report on the development of permanent plantings in the Murray system. Yes.
Yep. Okay. So, can you just describe to the committee the top level summary of what's happening?
So, what we've done as part of that, we call it Sunrise 21 mapping, is we've mapped the area of permanent plantings in the Murray system. And we've seen continued growth. That data had been done up until 2018, and we've just recently extended it through to 2021. And we've seen continued growth in permanent plantings in all three states.
I thought Victoria had a moratorium on it.
Victoria's got a moratorium on issuing of additional extraction licences. It doesn't prevent people who are already hold a licence from changing what they use that water for. That's a land use planning matter rather than a water matter.
And so the other states?
There isn't a similar restriction on new licences in the same way as there is in Victoria. What we've seen is agricultural production transfer from other enterprises, grapes and other things into almonds, particularly over the last 3 years.
And in some sense, this is my concern. So obviously we've talked about concerns about getting water through the Barmah Choke to be able to feed the almonds that are west of the Barmah Choke. My understanding is, from that report, is that there's reasonable growth in New South Wales in relation to almonds, and obviously, I have some concerns about supplementary water in relation to that. We've also seen the situation where we've got cotton on the Murrumbidgee now, almonds on the Murrumbidgee, and whilst there might be proper, people might not. Let's assume people are not working outside their licence requirements. It means that other industries end up suffering. You've said yourself, moving from grapes to almonds. And my view is the basin is a food bowl for Australia. It's a national asset, and you end up drawing. If you let the market just operate freely, as it appears to here, you end up having only a couple of types of crops, which might be great for export, but not good for a nation who wants to have a resilient food supply. So what does the report say in the context of that particular issue?
So the report really is a factual assessment of what has changed on the ground in terms of what are the areas of various crop types. It doesn't make an assessment of the relative merits of that. It really is just a factual assessment, and it provides information both to governments and to the market about how things have changed over time, and I guess developers or businesses with permanent plantings will have further insight into what the demands on the available water supply might be, particularly in dry times as a result of that information.
Because we've seen dairy farmers suffer because of this sort of problem in the past, and I just maybe go back to the minister then. The issue being we have particular plants that are quite profitable, plantations that are quite profitable, cotton, almonds, and they end up being able to afford the water, particularly in lean times, and it actually shuts down other food production across the basin. As we saw, for example, the government had to intervene in the market to ensure we had fodder during the recent drought. Because people weren't producing it, the water wasn't available at a reasonable price. What's the government's view? Is it just simply let the market do what it needs to do versus national interest, which a farmer can't determine, in terms of making sure we have the right mix of crop and the right resilience across the basin in respect of food production?
Well, Senator, I'm not quite sure what you're suggesting there in relation to the level of intervention by governments into the market in relation to the types of crops that that they may choose, or for that matter, how they may deploy their productive assets. And in this instance, the productive asset obviously is the water and the land. I would contend that in the majority of cases, the market operates best. When governments start interfering with markets, I think historically, if you look around the world, it's not usually ended well. But governments do have mechanisms by which they can intervene in a market under exceptional circumstances, and you made reference to one of those examples in terms of the drought and the provision of fodder to keep animals alive during those really critical times. So the government I'm a member of is not in the business of intervening and telling people how they should be using their productive assets. But obviously the government does have a role in terms of national interest. If from time to time temporary and targeted measures are required to be able to ensure that there is not a significant detrimental impact in the marketplace is a completely different proposition than suggesting that the government might tell a farmer that he's got to grow almonds or he's got to grow pumpkins. I think that would be an extraordinary overreach.
So I'm not suggesting a Soviet state here, but I put it to you: a farmer cannot work out national interest and should not work out national interest. Their job is to do the best they can with
business people.
Yeah, they're business people. But the basin itself is a national asset, and I'm asking what is being done at that higher level to monitor the concern that I'm raising, whereby we skew all of the production on the basis of market choice, and end up with other crop not being grown that is important to have here in Australia.
Well, the market will
cite
tell.
COVID as an example of.
Sorry?
I cite COVID as an example of disruption.
And look, and I think everybody would accept the fact that we saw some extraordinary circumstances around COVID, particularly when our supply chains into the country and out of the country were severely compromised, and we're still seeing the residual effect of that across the world. But in Australia, we believe in a market mechanism. The consumer will decide what they want and what they don't want to purchase. The other thing that I'd say is that Australia is a rich country because we are an exporting nation, and you cannot undervalue the extent to which our farmers provide the revenue to the bottom line through the earnings and the revenue earnings from exports. So I think I'd probably refer that. The kinds of reports that Mr Reynolds was talking about, where you get, Commonwealth oversight around, what's happening out there in the market, provide useful market information tools for farmers so that they can understand what's going on. Obviously, significant investment in organisations like ABARES to make sure that constantly information is available to farmers, the business people of the land, about the decisions that they may make going forward. And I think that is the role of government, is to make sure that the information is constantly made available at that high level. So that people can make the decisions that are in their best interests when it comes to the deployment of their assets.
Yeah, look, I think we might have to disagree to a certain extent about, the government's duty to be able to ensure that we have a variety of crops here in Australia from a national resilience perspective.
I think, Senator, it goes back to the point that the duty, I mean, governments have different views in terms of how much they want to intervene in the market.
Sure.
I obviously sit in a government that believes that the market is best placed in the majority of circumstances to be able to provide the best possible outcome. Of course, there are circumstances that occur where you have market failure for either for temporary reasons or sometimes for longer reasons, and that's where governments can intervene. But I would say that the history of long-term government intervention in markets around the world, not temporary targeted measures, but long-term interventions, have not always played out as best they can for the national interest or for the individual interests of in this instance, we're talking about farmers.
All right, well,
Senator, if I could just add to what the Minister's said, Australia is a major food and fibre exporter. We produce effectively twice as much for export as we consume locally. We consume around 90% of what we consume in Australia as food is grown in Australia, and 10% is imported from overseas. A lot of that tends to be sort of luxury food items. There are a few countries that I think we're the only country that's an entire continent, and so we have a whole range of crops grown across several different climates and whatever. And so the aspect of food security is obviously always a significant issue, but Australia is very blessed in the resources that we actually do have, and there are probably more choices for consumers in the markets and in the supermarkets now in terms of product than we've ever seen in our history because of innovation around food production and agricultural production. One of the areas where the government has sought to ensure fairness is around the relative market power between producers and retailers, and so the Dairy Code is an example of an example where there's been efforts to ensure better transparency as to the fairness of the price actually paid to producers so that they can get paid for what they produce rather than loss-leading activities occurring in supermarkets with particular products. And so the Dairy Code is one example of where government has sought to ensure transparency and fairness. So.
Okay, thank you. Just wonder, you talked about food security there with some level of knowledge, so I presume the department's actually looked at this, and therefore I wonder what you could provide the committee on that.
Senator, I look at a lot of issues, and when you look at the mega trends affecting the globe over the coming decades, and ABARES has published some work on this, I think it would be prudent for any National Agriculture Department to be mindful of one of the key aspects of a country, and that's our ability to feed ourselves.
It wasn't a criticism. I'm just saying because you're doing that, I wonder whether or not you've got some information, more detail that you.
Yeah, look, I'd be happy to have a much longer briefing, but ABARES has done some very good work on this. Obviously, a lot of the work that's been done to provide irrigation districts across Australia and to expand irrigation districts across Australia is to provide greater confidence about food in dry years, etc. So there's a whole range of policy issues, but the net result is that this year Australian agriculture will produce more than it's ever had by a large margin. That's off the back of a couple of very wet seasons and global commodity prices being at an all-time high in some areas, and that's a fantastic thing. There's a lot of resourcing goes into innovation in agriculture, obviously the research and development corporations and CSIRO. There's a huge amount of work into protecting our agricultural environment through our work on biosecurity. So in many ways, a lot of the work of my department is not only about ensuring Australia's food security, but ensuring the profitability of farm and food businesses right across the country, and we're in record territory at the moment. So.
All right.
Senator Patrick.
Can I just switch to one topic which I think we're very quick with the Secretary? the National Water Grid Authority board dismissal.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you, sir.
National Water Grid Authority board dismissal.
Senator Patrick, we dealt with the National Water Grid during the department's appearance on Monday or Tuesday? Tuesday.
Did you deal with that issue, the board dismissal?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, and it's a different department, of course, Senator, so I can't comment.
Oh, it was
in any
Monday,
event.
sorry, yes.
Okay.
Department of Infrastructure.
All right.
Thanks, Senator Patrick. Senator Grogan.
Thank you. In 2013, the state and federal governments adopted the Constraints Management Strategy, and implementing it requires flood easement agreements with private landlords. Can I just get an update on how many agreements have been reached?
I'll ask Dr Durham to come to the table.
Thank you.
But I will just note that the obligation to put those agreements in place is between states and landholders.
But you have a line of sight over that?
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'm not aware that there are any formal contracts in place at this stage. I am aware that there's been some significant consultation happening in South Australia with the relevant parties down there, as well as in New South Wales as part of the accelerated project that we signed up with New South Wales last year, particularly in the Kundruk-Parakuta Reach and the Mid-Murray-Anna Branch. And I'm aware that New South Wales is actively discussing next steps with the rest of the community in that they're part of what we call the Hume to Yarrawonga Constraint Project in New South Wales.
But there's none so far?
I am not aware of any so far.
Do you have a sense of what that time frame might be?
As I just alluded, those
Obviously
particular ones, they're more eminent, and they'll also pilot in those jurisdictions the rollout for other landholders to then participate. So it's establishing those in the framework for those agreements, the terms of those agreements, and then they'll be able to then start to roll that out more systematically with the remaining community riparian landholders.
And we should just note, Senator, that this is an area where we've done considerable work with South Australia, New South Wales and Victoria over the last 18 months in particular to support them to accelerate the most prospective projects in this program of work. So compared to where we were about 18 months ago, there's been significant progress. Again, it's a program of work which requires states to work closely with stakeholders and a large number of stakeholders.
I would just add to that list as well, because we always tend to think about the Southern Basin, but there is also a constraints project in the Northern Basin in the Guida, and we recently received a business case from the New South Wales Government in progressing that, and that assessment is awaiting a decision from the Minister, but it's looking very prospective for the progress in the Guida catchment as well, which is 3 reaches in that valley.
Yeah, but the key thing is we've now got funding arrangements in place. We've got states working with each other in terms of engagement arrangements, and well placed to start to accelerate discussions and delivery of some of those on-ground projects across 3 states.
And you feel that confident that that's starting to get some traction?
Yes.
It's definitely momentum building. I had no momentum, I'm taking it. And as I said, once we start to get landholders to agree the terms of the arrangements that each of the jurisdictions are negotiating, we'll start to see more and more progress with those projects as well.
Yeah. And I mean, there were some significant concerns amongst large numbers of landholders, so there's been a lot of work done to deal with some of the concerns and fears that they had in terms of making available additional information to them, additional modelling. I think in New South Wales now they've deployed their local land services in terms of dealing with landholders, which is a significant step forward, because the local land service agencies in New South Wales have people on ground who have pre-existing established relationships with landholders in terms of interfacing with them on a range of programs of work.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Grogan. Senator Patrick?
No, look, I'm happy to stop.
Yeah.
Question for the Chair.
Thank you, Senator Davey.
Just one question for the Chief. He sits here so patiently all day. I can't bear to let him get away with it.
Not quite sitting in the front row, not quite sitting in the back row.
He might be an assistant minister, really.
On standby.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. Just a very broad brush question, but we've now had, the Basin Plan was passed in 2012. We heard this morning you've got over 2,100 gigalitres in your portfolio now, and you've got 10 years of experience managing that water. I'm just interested to hear what you think the successes and failures of the process are, and what we're achieving with our water, and what you've learnt over time about how we can make best use of that portfolio.
And you've only got 20 minutes.
Thank you, Senator. Hilton Taylor, Acting Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder. I was asked a similar question yesterday in a forum with the Peaks body about, well, what do you think is the best outcome that you've achieved? And I thought about it in a few ways, and I thought, well, in the absolute pits of the 18-19 drought, I think one of the best outcomes that we achieved was the supply of water through connectivity flows in the northern basin that kept a system that was in absolute dire straits just ticking over long enough for natural flows to come in behind it. And that had an amazing impact upon the northern basin fish populations, which are now flourishing and restocking big chunks of the basin. But more importantly, or as importantly, a co-benefit of that was every town that our water passed through and moved down the river, it had to fill the weir pool in that town before it could go on and do further environmental work down the river. And the cultural and social benefits in those remote towns in the northern basin was extraordinary. So I think that's one of the really outstanding outcomes that we achieved. Then I sort of flipped to a year like this, a really wet year, and people think, well, what do you need environmental water in a wet year like this for? We already this year, with some months to go, have used more water this year than in any other year since the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder has been established. And people think, well, yeah, why? So there are a couple of really standout things that have been achieved in a wet year like this. One was at the beginning of the season, when there was uncertainty around how much water was coming and what we were going to do, we actually were able to work with water managers and river operators to get the Great Darling Anna Branch connected from Lake Corndilla through to the Murray. We didn't know how much more water was going to come, and without environmental water that couldn't have been started. So that was something that we underwrote and achieved, and that's, as they call it, a fish superhighway in the western part of New South Wales, so it's a really critical outcome. But then the other things that we've used water for in this wet year, in the Mid-Murray area, in the Murray Irrigation Limited footprint, we've put through probably around $1 million worth of water that's in terms of fees and charges to Murray Irrigation Limited, and we've used their infrastructure to deliver that water into streams and creeks in that Mid-Murray area to provide plumes of fresh water when there was some black water going through that area. There was a question about black water before, and that was like an insurance policy heading off the possibility of fish deaths like we saw in the floods in 2016. Touch wood, so far it's been successful. If those floods get to a stage sometime later in the year that it inundates vast areas of the floodplain, we can mitigate, but we can't stop those natural events happening in terms of fish deaths and things. But this year so far, that's been successful. The other thing we've done is that in this wet year, there's been a number of natural bird breeding events kick off. And because the rivers are regulated, sometimes the tail on the recessions, or as those rivers recede back down, is quite sharp. And these bird breeding events can be left stranded high and dry. And then feral animals can get in there, nests can be abandoned or disrupted by feral animals. We've managed to get pelicans through to roost fledglings. We've had other birds in other wetlands right across the system that we've supported with water on the back of it. So we've slowed the angle of that recession, kept the water in there, allowed the birds to finish their natural cycle. And then if we look at it in the longer term, I think it was mentioned before, since the millennium, or the 10 years immediately after the millennium drought, there was connectivity between the Murray River and the Coorong every year during that 10 years. 8 out of those 10 years, that connectivity would have been disrupted without environmental water. That's a significant contribution to that recovery of that system. Some years it was not much more than a trickle. We just had a few gates open in the barrage. We allowed that passage of fish back and forth. We allowed that continued export of salt, and we've actually seen both the bottom end of the river and the Coorong gradually improving. It's a long trajectory, but that's on its way. So there's some of the highlights, and that doesn't sort of touch on some of the things we've done with other big fish breeding events and bird breeding events across, but it sort of gives this idea of a dry time, a wet time, and a longer term time.
Thank you. Anyone else questions for the chief?
Just to follow up.
Oh, well, of the chew.
Chewing?
No.
No. Senator Grogan, do you want to?
I just wanted to check in and see if we had had a response from Minister Pitt about the Westland.
No, I haven't. I rang and attempted to contact him in the break, the 11 o'clock break, but I don't know whether he's travelling, but he went through to voicemail. So I've left a message and I will advise the committee as soon as I've heard back. I haven't had a response in the time I've been sitting here.
Assuming we're adjourning, that means in writing or an email to the Secretary?
Yeah, I'm happy to make sure I provide a formal response to the Secretary.
Can I also ask about the time frame, the agreed time frame for the tabling of something of a 450 plan?
Yeah, equally didn't get to speak to the Minister about that, but I'm going to put my neck out on this one and say you'll have it in 2 weeks.
Okay. I'll hold you to that.
I know you will.
All right, that is terrific, and that concludes today's proceedings. And I thank Minister Ruston and all witnesses who have given evidence to the committee today. Thank you also to Hansard, to Broadcasting and the Secretariat, and the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.